The Zoom link was published in the meeting agenda. Live public comments are being accepted at this meeting in place of emailed public comments. Public comments may be provided live by members of the public utilizing the Zoom link to participate in the meeting. Utilize the raise phone or tablet, or else enter *9 to raise your hand if dialing in by phone. Please ensure your name is correctly entered in your Zoom profile so city staff may properly identify you when it is your turn to speak. Those dialing in by phone will be called to speak by the last 4 digits of their phone number as shown in the Zoom interface. So with that, we'll go ahead then and move to the agenda, and I will ask that we go ahead and start with the roll call.
Commissioner Berman.
Present.
Commissioner Bigstick.
Present.
Commissioner Godwin.
Present.
Commissioner Hauser.
Present.
Commissioner Leal.
Present.
Commissioner Niblin.
I'm here. Thank you. So we'll go ahead then and move to the salute to the flag, and maybe I could ask Commissioner Hauser to lead us in the salute to the flag tonight.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States
of America
And to the republic for
one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Commissioner Hauser. And we'll then move to administrative business. And the first item of administrative business is the approval of the order of agenda. And I will ask if there's a motion to approve the order of agenda. Commissioner Hauser.
I'll make a motion to approve the order of the agenda.
Thank you, Commissioner Hauser. Is there a second to Commissioner Hauser's motion? Commissioner Godwin.
I second that motion.
Great. Well, we've had a motion and a second to approve the order of agenda. Could we get a roll call vote, please?
Commissioner Berman.
Yes.
Commissioner Bigstick.
Yes.
Commissioner Godwin.
Yes.
Commissioner Hauser.
Yes.
Commissioner Leal.
Yes.
Commissioner Niblin.
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. So the next item on our agenda under administrative business is the approval of the minutes. And we have 2 sets of minutes here, one for the meeting of May 18th, 2020, and the other for July 6th, 2020. I'll leave it to the pleasure of the commission whether or not I get a motion that would deal with both sets of minutes at the same time, or whether folks want to break it out separately. Commissioner Godwin, is that your hand raised, or was that left over from the last
That
item?
one was left over.
All right. Commissioner Berman.
I move that we approve the minutes from the May 18th, 2020 meeting, as well as the July 6th, 2020 meeting.
Thank you for the motion. So Commissioner Berman has moved that we approve minutes from both of those meetings. Is there a second to that motion, or any comment or discussion with respect to the motion? Commissioner Leal.
I'll second the motion.
Okay, well, we have one motion for both sets of minutes. Can we get a roll call vote, please?
Commissioner Berman.
Yes.
Commissioner Bigstick.
Yes.
Commissioner Godwin.
Yes.
Commissioner Hauser.
Yes.
Commissioner Leal.
Yes.
Commissioner Niblin.
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. Takes us then to the next item on the agenda, which is a designation of liaison to the City Council meeting of August 24th. And this relates to lots 4 through 12 Odstat Way, single family residence. Do we have a volunteer to serve as the liaison for this matter? And maybe it would be helpful just to get a real quick refresher on the matter from staff.
Of course, thank you, Chair. This project was for a single family residence in the Rockaway Beach neighborhood. It involved a street and utilities extension known as Odstat Way. It's a spur off of Rockaway Beach Avenue on the southern side of the Rockaway Beach neighborhood.
Thank you, sir. So with that said, is there anybody who is inclined to volunteer to serve as the liaison for the City Council meeting? Commissioner Hauser.
Just remind me, what date was that that council meeting? I think I'm going to volunteer, but I want to make sure
It's
I'm
the
available.
24th of August, the 24th.
Give me one second.
Sure.
Yes, I'm happy to volunteer.
Thank you for stepping up. I'll go ahead and we'll avail ourselves of your volunteering, and we'll designate you the liaison then. All right, so that then will take us to oral communications. And this is the portion of the agenda that's available to the public to address the Planning Commission on any issue within the subject matter jurisdiction of the commission that is not on the agenda. The time allowed for any speaker will be 3 minutes. So I'll ask Mr. Murdoch to let us know whether or not there's anybody who's indicated a desire to speak under oral communications.
Thank you, Chair. For everyone participating through the Zoom application, click the raise hand function at the bottom of the screen if you want to speak on this item. For general oral communications for items not on the agenda, if you're dialed in, please press *9 on your telephone to raise your hand. Raising your hand allows us to see who's interested in speaking so we can bring you into the meeting. And we have one individual, Gary Luttringer. Let me bring you in, Gary. Gary, you can go ahead when you're ready. Make sure to unmute your phone first.
Yeah, just to make sure I'm clear, is this to do with the new development on Monterey? Is that what we're talking about?
No, actually, Mr. Luttringer, this that is item 1 under the public hearings.
Oh, I'm sorry then. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I don't have nothing to.
All right. Mr. Murdoch, why don't we see if there's anybody else? We'll wait another couple of seconds.
And I am seeing no one else, Chair.
Thank you. We'll go ahead then and move from oral communications then to continued public hearings. And we have one continued public hearing this evening. It's file number 2002-001, Site Development Permit PSD 71402, Use Permit UP 90402, Tentative Subdivision Map SUB 20402, authorization for heritage tree removal and an authorization for logging operations for construction of 4 new townhouse duplex buildings, a total of 8 dwelling units, and associated subdivision for condominium purposes on an approximately 53,000 square foot undeveloped lot located on the east side of Monterey Road, approximately 250 feet southeast of the Monterey Road and Hickey Boulevard intersection. This is APN 009-381-010. The project would include removal of 7 heritage trees and 50 non-heritage trees, and the project is known as the Vistamar project. The recommended CEQA action for this item is adoption of a mitigated negative declaration and mitigation monitoring and reporting program, and staff recommends that we approve this project as conditioned. Before we hear staff report, I will indicate that I did discuss with the city attorney whether or not it was appropriate for me to recuse myself from consideration of this item owing to the fact that I live relatively close to the project site, a little beyond 1,000 feet from the project site. So there's no statutory basis for me having to recuse myself. And after consideration of the matter in consultation with the city attorney, I believe that I can and should participate in these deliberations. And with that, I'll ask for the staff report.
Thank you, Chair. Before we proceed to Associate Planner Bonnie O'Connor, I'd like to confirm with Mr. Contrabecchi and Mr. Chavarria. Are you the 2 representatives of your project team, or is there anyone else I need to bring into the meeting?
We are the 2 representatives.
Very good, thank you. Bonnie?
Good evening, Commissioners. I am Associate Planner Bonnie O'Connor. The item before you involves consideration of an initial study, mitigated negative declaration, or ISM&D, for the environmental review of the proposed project, as well as a site development permit, use permit, tentative subdivision, heritage tree removal authorization, and logging operation approval to allow construction of an 8 dwelling units and associated improvements on a vacant property located along Monterey Road. The project is located in the Westview Pacific Highlands neighborhood, just south of the intersection with Hickey Boulevard. The project site is an uphill sloped 1.2 acre lot. The property has a land use designation of low density residential, which allows for a density of 4 to 11 dwellings for a lot of this size, and is located within the R3 multifamily residential zoning district. The project includes 4 buildings, each containing 2 side-by-side townhouses for a total of 8 townhouse units. The units would range in size from 1,592 square feet to 1,795 square feet of living area. Each unit would be 3 stories, would include a rooftop deck and a 2-car garage. Entrances to each unit would be on either the first or second floor. Because of the slope of the site, garage access would be provided on the rear elevation on the 3rd floor of each townhome, with access provided along a private driveway. Roof access would be provided from each townhouse and would lead to a common open space roof deck. The maximum height of the buildings would be 35 feet. The project would have 11.7% lot coverage, well below the 60% maximum, and 58% landscaping, well above the 20% minimum of the zoning district. Each unit would meet or exceed the applicable standards required for clustered housing projects, including the 150 square foot minimum of private open space, 750 square foot minimum of usable open space, 200 cubic yard minimum of private storage, and at least 10 feet separation between structures. The project has a modern aesthetic with a dominant architectural material consisting of natural tone panel sidings and metallic accents. With the project would include private open space with the use of patios and balconies. Common open space would be provided with the rooftop deck and a landscaped area on the south side of the project site. Several trees and shrubs cover the entire project site. The southern portion of the sites are predominantly covered with dense ruderal vegetation that appears to have been influenced by past cut and fill activities. A total of 80 trees were surveyed on or adjacent to the site. The proposed project would directly impact 50 non-heritage trees and 7 heritage trees. To mitigate impacts on heritage trees, a condition of approval would require the applicant to analyze whether heritage trees on site could be successfully relocated on site or otherwise replaced on site. A final landscaping plan is also a condition of approval to ensure that adequate landscaping is incorporated into the project. The steep slope of the site is such that retaining walls are necessary throughout the site to support the structures and driveway. New retaining walls within the front setback and parallel to the front property line would range in size up to 3 feet as measured from the side facing the street. The remaining retaining walls would range in size up to 20 feet tall as measured from the exposed side of the wall. However, the municipal code directs that the height of the retaining wall is to be measured from the higher grade. Most of the retaining walls would be tiered to limit the exposed wall. The exposed retaining wall would be textured to have a rock-like appearance, and the tiered area would be vegetated and landscaped to soften the appearance of the retaining wall. An existing ephemeral drainage ditch located in the southeast portion of the project would empty into a relocated and new catch basin and head wall located in the southeast corner of the site, behind the common space area. The water from the ditch would continue to be routed into the city's underground stormwater system. Under the county's C3 stormwater requirements, the project would have to treat 100% of the disturbed project area. The project proposed to capture runoff from impervious surfaces such as rooftops and the driveway and route the water into appropriately sized flow-through planters. A condition of approval will ensure that the site meets the C3 requirements, including the treatment of the runoff from the lower driveway portions. To evaluate the environmental impacts of the proposed project under the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA, staff prepared an ISMND. Staff's analysis in the ISMND identified potentially significant environmental impacts to biological resources, cultural resources, geology and soils, hydrology and water quality, noise, and tribal cultural resources. Based on substantial evidence in the record, staff was able to develop a mitigation measure or measures which would reduce each potential impact to less than significant levels. The mitigation measures identified in the ISMND are included in the Mitigation Monitoring and Reporting Program, or MMRP. Compliance with the MMRP is a condition of approval. Preparation of the ISMND followed all applicable laws governing public review and comment. Staff exceeded the requirements of state laws by preparing a response to comment to all received comments on the ISMND. Staff received a number of public comments on this project, some of which were included in the agenda packet and others which were received after agenda packet publication have been forwarded to the Planning Commission prior to public hearing. These comments received after agenda packet publication were made available for public review on the Planning Commission portion of the Planning Department's webpage. Staff's evaluation of the proposed project supports a finding that as mitigated, all potentially significant environmental impacts can be reduced to less than significant levels, and that as conditioned, there is evidence to support all required findings for approval of a site development permit, use permit, and tentative subdivision, heritage tree removal authorization, and logging operation. Therefore, staff recommends adopting the resolution attached to the staff report. Staff, including the city's environmental consultant, Rob Stinson from Rainey Planning and Management, is here to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. O'Connor, for that report. And I think what I'll do now is see if any of the commissioners have any questions before we turn to the public comment aspect of all this. Looks like Commissioner Big Stick is the first to have his hand up.
Thank you, Chair. And I certainly have a number of questions, but while I was going over the geotechnical item in the MND, I noticed finally after a while reading it that it was referencing 2002 being when the geotechnical work was done. And so what occurred to me was that it might be a nice place to begin just by having a brief history of, the question is, so this started in 2002 and it's taken 18 years. What's been the process that it's taken this long to get from there to here?
I can tell you what the records from what I've seen can show, and maybe the applicant can fill in the rest. But this project was initially pursued in the early 2000s. It never proceeded past the point of finding the application complete. In 2014, the applicant then it then stalled out for several years, and then in 2015, the applicant came back and kind of reactivated the application and has been moving forward since then more steadily.
Thank you very much. I feel like one of the big points of discussion may wind up being water drainage as we go along, but I figured I'd get that ball rolling a little bit. Just to begin with, and I'm a fairly lay person when it comes to technical stuff, the drainage ditches themselves, the catch basins, how big are those, or approximately how big might they be?
I believe that would probably be a better question for the applicant.
Okay. How much do we investigate the current capacity of storm drainage that we currently have when looking at a development this size?
Sure. So the applicant did prepare a drainage report, which was reviewed by our engineering department. And I'm gonna let them take over the drainage question from here.
Are you referencing the city engineer there, Ms. O'Connor?
Yes, I'm sorry. Deputy Director Bautista, or there we go.
Thank you. We'll ask one of you all to come to the mic, so to speak.
Good evening, Commissioners. Sam Bautista, your Deputy Director. I have Ray Dungeness from my office who did the review of the storm drainage report. So he will be answering your question.
Good evening, Planning Commissioners. Yes, so the applicant's engineer prepared a hydrology report which takes into consideration the drainage basin in and around the property, and has concluded that the 24-inch pipe that is that they are connecting to has enough capacity to handle the flow of the pre and post development that's going to be coming off the site.
Thank you, Mr. Donguines. Any other questions, Commissioner Big Stick, for the on the civil engineering side?
Sure. The last one I had kind of in that vein for now, and forgive me, it was a detail I overlooked as I was going through. Is the driveway permeable?
It is not.
It's not.
Okay. And I guess the other question I kind of had, there's this reference to an ephemeral drainage ditch on the property. When I was there, it was hard for me to kind of pinpoint where that might be. So maybe you could elaborate a little bit on what that is.
Sure. So it's a drainage ditch that receives water for a portion of the year. It is a artificially created ditch that is directed from the properties to the southeast onto this property. It currently enters into a head wall and into underground facilities on the project site. So you wouldn't see the drainage from the sidewalk. So it brings it underground further up on the property. The proposed project would just move that head wall even further up on the hillside.
Okay. That's all I have about water drainage. I have brief questions about trees and then one about the conditions of approval, and then I'm good for the moment. On the topic of trees, so from my reading, what I came to understand was essentially there are 4 of those heritage trees that seem to be in good condition. Is that an accurate assessment?
I think it would be more appropriate to say there's 2 in good condition. And then the remaining 5 were in fair to poor condition.
So there was this added idea that perhaps the trees could be moved. Was that idea added because it seemed like, yes, in fact, they can? Do we know anything more than that's an idea? Or does it seem probable that from where we're at right now that the trees could be moved?
The applicant can speak to this. I know they reached out to an arborist in response to the public comments that we received at the July 20th hearing. But that requirement that they review it is a condition of their approval.
Okay, thank you very much. And then my final questions for the moment had to do with the conditions of approval. Actually, I think that might have been one of them. The other one was conditions number 32 and 36. When I was reading 32 and 36, they were almost identical except for a couple of words. And I'm just curious if they can be consolidated into one COA or if for the legal reasons, we need to keep them as separate conditions.
I'll take a look at that and get back to you for the remainder of the meeting.
Okay. I'll turn it over for the time being. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Big Stick. Commissioner Hauser.
Thank you. I have a few different questions. I think the first couple are for Rainey. So for the MMRP, it sounded like the first 2 biology mitigations were for dusky-footed wood rats. And I wanted to know if nests had actually been found on site, which was the kind of like what spurred the mitigation measure.
The biologist deemed that there was a potential for the species to occur, and then provided a pre-construction survey to make sure.
So have surveys actually been done on the site so far? Because I saw a lot of pre-construction surveys required, including like also wetland surveys, which typically I would have expected to have already been done.
Yeah, they did reconnaissance level surveys, so not like protocol level or anything like that.
Got it. So the protocol level are pre-con and pre, okay, that makes sense. And then for mitigation 4-1-B, which says that if nest avoidance is infeasible, you know, how to keep working on it. But I didn't see that CDFW was still one of the responsible agencies noted on that one. So am I correctly understanding that A will be done, CDFW will be notified in like whether it's infeasible or not?
Right. Yes, they're required to be included, especially if they find species to update the CNDDB list.
Okay. And then I had a question. I don't know if this is a public works or a fire question, but it seemed that there was it's a single lot subdivision. I didn't see any easements proposed. So I didn't see like an emergency vehicle access easement over the rear drive aisle. So I'm wondering if someone can talk about emergency access and if aerial apparatus and access has been reviewed, because it looks to be further from the street than what Appendix D would typically allow. So I just want to make sure that that was actually thought through.
Deputy Chief Lauderdale, would you like to speak to the technical aspects? I can mention initially, Commissioner Hauser, we did evaluate that. And I think the appearances are deceiving of this project. In fact, the driveway to the rear of the project site is not required as a fire apparatus access road, as is commonly required on many types of projects. And for that reason, we did not pursue the emergency vehicle access easement, as you might expect to see. But Deputy Chief Lauderdale can elaborate.
I don't really have anything to add. You covered it.
Okay. So we're confident that like if there is an emergency that fire trucks and ambulances can get to people with the amount of stairs and without. Or confidence that the current design is safe.
Yeah, the current design is within the specifications of the fire code.
I didn't see any I see a lot of trees being removed, but I didn't see any replacement trees suggested. And I saw a note that that would potentially be looked at separately. I wanted to get a better understanding of the thought process there and how many the planning department would expect to see.
So it would be shown in the final landscaping plan. It's part of that condition of approval for the preparation of the final landscaping plan. As mentioned before, the applicant has reached out to an arborist to figure out the feasibility of relocating the trees. The applicant can confirm this for you, but my understanding is that the arborist suggested that the feasibility for the trees in good condition are higher than the ones that are in poor or fair. Additionally, the arborist found that some of the trees some of the trees that were in fair conditions were multi-trunk trees, which I understood to be more difficult to relocate and less feasible. So
sure. And so sorry, and maybe I think my question was maybe unclear. I'm assuming that a relocation is potentially infeasible as it, you know, trees don't necessarily survive. I'm not an arborist. But if a relocation is infeasible and the trees do need to be removed, I would imagine that at least 1-to-1 replacement would be required. Okay. And is there a replacement ratio that would be kind of a minimum currently contemplated, or?
Yeah, so the same condition of approval requires a replacement ratio of 1-to-1. It lets the applicant account for if any trees are successfully relocated, they get to count that as a replacement tree. But it's a 1-to-1 ratio. In the event that an arborist does find that a replacement tree is infeasible or they're unable to find an appropriate location for all heritage trees, and the applicant would be responsible for paying an in lieu fee.
Got it. Okay. And then I just have two more questions. So I think you had said that the grade differential between the pads and the public sidewalk was about 20 feet. Did I hear that correctly?
I don't believe I said that.
Oh, sorry. What's the what's the grade differential between the public walk and where the buildings start?
I think it varies across the site. At one point, it's about 12 feet of difference. At another point, it's about 7 feet. So it varies across the site.
Okay. And then the last question was, it looks like the sidewalk is proposed to be existing to remain. And I wanted to understand, it wasn't quite clear to me from the landscape plans and the grading plans if there were new street trees proposed or a widening or a repair of some of the existing kind of crags that are over there. So I wanted to understand kind of what the requirement was there.
No street trees are proposed. A condition of approval would require them to repair any damage that they do to any public infrastructure. But maybe senior engineer Dunginus can provide any further input of requirements.
That is correct. We will do a site inspection during and construction or before construction, and take note of any sidewalks that is cracked or broken or is a tripping hazard. And during the building permit, we'll include those in the encroachment permit to be replaced.
So if it's currently cracked, am I understanding that it doesn't need to be fixed? It only would need to be fixed if it was cracked by the applicant?
Well, if it's cracked now, then it would potentially be a tripping hazard in the future. We will have the applicant replace it.
Okay, thank you guys very much.
Thank you, Commissioner Hauser. Commissioner Berman.
Thank you. A lot of my questions have already been asked. Thank you, Commissioner Hauser and Commissioner Bigstick. Just kind of adding a few, touching off of the vein that Commissioner Hauser was just discussing. I too had a question about the proposal to keep the existing sidewalk, curb, and gutter. Just from my inspection of the site, it looks like several locations of the sidewalk and even kind of structurally the roadway are degrading, but I didn't notice any requirement for replacement of the road. I know that we have our typical COA, but I'm wondering if there was any consideration to fully replace the sidewalk, curb, gutter, and a portion of the asphalt in front of the site.
So some of the sidewalk will be replaced, of course, when they construct their driveway. And we do typically require the applicant to replace the AC pavement to the limits of the longest trench. And we normally require them to do a 2-inch grind with a 2-inch overlay.
I don't know if Public Works had a chance to inspect the site currently, but just noticing that there's a lot of alligator cracking in the asphalt leads me to believe that there might be some aggregate base and structural deficiencies. Is that something that's going to be studied and reviewed during construction? Because I don't believe that simply replacing the AC over that would solve the problem.
Yeah, when they do the overlay and when they do the base repair, or when they grind the street, we will look to see if those cracks go further down, and if it does, then we'll make some adjustment.
Okay. And then also similarly, I noticed that, so it looks like the southernmost driveway cut it looks like it's supposed to be a driveway apron, but then the one farther north, it looks like it may be a driveway with returns. Is that intended to be a driveway with the returns and then therefore need curb ramps? Or is it going to be another driveway cut with an apron?
Both of them will be ADA compliant. So yes,
Okay.
they would both have ramps for both driveways.
Okay, because the plans currently, the tentative map plans don't show curb ramps there.
Yeah.
But
yeah, we'll take care of that during the building permit, encroachment permit application.
Okay. Thank you. And then I have a couple drainage questions that might be appropriate for you as well. I noticed that there's an existing drainage easement where the existing head wall is, and it kind of runs throughout the southern property line. Is the applicant intending to vacate that easement? Because it looks like there's new development of walls and structures proposed within that easement. So it was unclear to me if that easement is being vacated and a new easement will be proposed, or if the existing easement will remain.
I think the new easement will need to be reconfigured because the pipes in the property will change. So it will probably be enlarged. So, but I'll, refer that to the applicant's engineer. Yeah, the configuration of the final easement will follow the pipe that is being proposed through the site.
Okay, that makes sense. Typically during this planning and entitlement process, especially because we'll have the applicant is requesting a tentative map to be approved, do the easements have to be somewhat solidified during this planning approval process, or is that something that we could trust will be finalized during the building permit phase?
Yeah, we were trying to get that solidified through the tentative map process. It was not during this for the planning commission meeting, but we will get that done.
Okay.
Commissioner Berman, I think the important thing to remember is we do all that we can at the tentative map phase. Sometimes during preparation of the detailed improvement plans, certain aspects may need to change. The important standard for the final map is substantial conformance with the tentative map. And so to the extent that we understand there is a drainage easement there now, and there will continue to need to be a drainage easement, the location and description of it can change slightly as long as it's substantially conforming with what's indicated on the tentative map if it's approved.
Okay, so potentially the lack of the new drainage easement layout is not a substantial deficiency between tentative map and final map. Is that correct?
I think if the placement shifts slightly, it's not a substantial conformance issue. If it's not shown at all, it could be a substantial conformance issue.
Yeah, because I didn't see it at all is my main concern.
So I'd have to defer to engineering as far as the reasoning for it not being on the tentative map, and the applicant may be able to clarify. And if it is in the commission's will, they could condition to modify the tentative map to include an easement with a reasonably precise description of where it is and the function of it, and the person or parties to benefit, which I imagine would be the city for conveyance of that stormwater.
Got it. Okay, I'll note that and we can deliberate on it.
Commissioner Berman?
Yep.
On sheet number 6 of the tentative townhouse map, it shows a floating drainage easement on the south side.
Do you have to, 5? 6. Okay, I thought that was the existing one. Is that, or is that not the existing easement?
I think, yeah, that is the existing easement.
Yeah, so it was unclear to me if, basically, I didn't really see anywhere where the applicant was required to create a new easement, because I think the old one is kind of not as applicable anymore, and I agree it would have to be a new one.
Okay, we would, since there is an existing drainage easement, we will definitely address a new easement to cover the new pipe.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'll note that. I'll remember it when we get to the deliberation.
Commissioner Berman, I think what's important to note is this sheet 6 is part of the tentative map as it's proposed, and it does indicate the drainage easement. So I think we are squarely within substantial conformance territory in the sense that the exact placement of it and exact dimensions could change slightly to fit the final improvement plan. It's not a case where the easement is not shown at all.
Okay, okay, that answers my question. Thank you. And thank you, Director Batista, for pointing that out. A couple more drainage questions. In the same area, so I noticed the applicant is proposing a drainage swale, a concrete swale that appears to, it appears that it might drain to the right of way, but can you clarify, is that going to ultimately drain to the right of way, or will it drain to an inlet? I'm seeing it on the grading plan of the tentative map, which is sheet 4, packet page 89.
Yes, so the grading plan is the inlet. There is an inlet at the end of that swale. If you could look at sheet 6, there is an inlet at the end. It's not shown in sheet 4.
Oh, it's just not shown in the grading plan. Okay. And then just a few more. Thank you. So I did see that the applicant studied the capacity of the 24-inch main in the street. But I do know we received a lot of comments about the drainage further downstream in the existing system, including the culvert and then where the culvert daylights. Did the applicant have to study how far downstream did the applicant study capacities for storm?
Well, for this site and the surrounding drainage, the amount of water leaving the site, it's going to be pretty much the same. So the effect downstream, it's going to be the same as currently is. We're not adding any more area to the drainage area. The drainage area is what it is. So the amount of water being collected, it's going to be approximately the same. So whatever drainage that is being collected at Big Inch Creek or downstream, it's pretty much going to be the same as it is currently.
And that's absolutely correct, Commissioner Berman. In the full inundation scenario, for example, right, like perhaps the 100-year storm example, I think under most precipitation events, which fall far short of that significant, even 10 or 50-year storms, the majority of rainfall, the outflow from the site from stormwater will actually be less than the pre-development condition, in the sense that most of those flows will be captured on site in the on-site stormwater treatment system and slowly metered out of the site in the event that they're not infiltrated into the treatment system itself. And so on balance, the stormwater condition in the surrounding area is likely to improve. And in the worst case scenario, not be any worse than the current condition. And so we've not identified any project related impacts to the stormwater system.
Okay. Related to that, is this a county designated hydromodification site?
The disturbed area is less than 1 acre, so it's not a hydromodification project.
Okay, but it sounds like the applicant intends to monitor the flow and volume runoff of the site in a similar vein to hydromodification, in that the post-construction flows off of the site and durations will be similar to the existing condition. Is that correct? It sounded like Mr. Murdoch just explained it that way.
That is correct. For C3, we try to mimic the pre and post development runoff from the site.
Okay, great. Yeah, because I know we received a lot of comments on that. I'm glad that we got to discuss that right now. And then that's all my questions for staff right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Berman. Commissioner Godwin, did you have questions?
Yeah, I just had a few. I wanted to talk a little more about drainage. I understand you're using detention pipes, manifolds, and basins, and that ought to slow down the water. Is there a way that's being measured, or how did you decide that was the appropriate design that ensured that the water flow wouldn't increase?
Well, we have the stormwater municipal regional permit, which regulates the amount or the size of the treatment that's appropriate for the development. So there's a calculation that's performed by the applicant, which is peer reviewed by the city's consultant.
Okay, and for that reason also you chose not to have a permeable driveway or any other large surfaces?
According to the applicant, the driveway is such the steep slope, it doesn't promote the permeability of the driveway. So instead, he's collecting the driveway flow into a trench drain and directing that into a flow through planter.
All right, I guess that makes sense to me. My civil engineering background's a little limited. I had one other general question. Basically, it seems to me there are large windows in the garages and they tend to be on the top of the structure. So they'd be relatively easy to convert to apartments or some sort of residence rather than using them as a garage. Are there any restrictions on that?
I think, yeah, Bonnie, do you want to address that point?
Yeah, no, there's not. There's no zoning or requirement that would prevent windows on any room. The potential for any space to be converted into a future an accessory dwelling unit is not something that we can really evaluate at a discretionary level. If in the future a property owner seek to convert existing space into an ADU in line with our municipal code, they would be able to do that.
All right, that's my last question.
Thank you. I saw that Commissioner Big Stick had his hand up again. I just wanted to ask a couple of real quick questions, and then I'll turn to Commissioner Big Stick. I just wanted to go back to the tree replacement piece real quick. I think most other matters, well, frankly, probably this matter's already been covered adequately as well, but I nevertheless have a question. It's about the 1-to-1 replacement ratio, for trees. Is that something that the commission has any discretion to adjust? I mean, I've always been a little bit concerned that these trees that are these replacement trees, it's never entirely clear how they're going to fare, and it strikes me that sometimes it's appropriate maybe to bank on some of those tree replacements not taking, and maybe requesting a slightly higher ratio. I was wondering if that's within our discretion.
Commissioner Niblin, I think it is in the commission's discretion. I think we would want to understand clearly the purpose for that. I think to your concern, likely condition number 15 adequately addresses survivability, if you will, of the replacement trees or the relocated trees. It's a long condition with a number of moving parts, but I think sort of in the middle or just past the halfway point, it talks about the requirement that the landscaping be maintained in a healthful condition. So I think we are okay if we were to limit it to a 1-to-1 ratio in the event that any of the trees do not survive. The final landscape plan would require that they be replaced and replanted with another tree. And those trees need to be maintained in perpetuity as part of the project approval if the commission approves the project. I think if there are other issues related to the heritage tree removal in terms of slope stability or aesthetics or other factors, if we had enough evidence and discussion of what that impact is that needs to be mitigated, the commission may also have discretion in that sense to require additional trees to be planted. The only caveat I would provide is that generally speaking, more trees always sounds better, but there are limits to good forestry practice. There is a limit to how many trees a particular site can have safely and healthfully. And so we would just ask that if the commission does explore that possibility, that we retain enough flexibility to consult with a qualified arborist to ensure that we're not creating unintentional or unintended problems with the tree planting.
Well, that makes sense. My concern is primarily that we actually get one tree ultimately for every tree that's planted. And if condition 15 is, and I apologize, I probably didn't read it closely or carefully enough, but if it's drafted in such a way that you sort of into the future, it would require a replacement of a tree that doesn't take, then I think that would address my concerns. I guess the other question is more of a technical question regarding in lieu fees for tree replacement. What is that in lieu fee paid to? What account or what? How does the in lieu fee for trees work?
The process. Oh, sorry, Christian. The process is detailed within our municipal code. It does give. It does explain that the value of the tree still needs to be determined. I don't know if it. I don't recall offhand if it details what fund it would go into. And I don't know that either offhand, but the process of determining the value of the tree is detailed in our municipal code.
Okay, thanks. Commissioner Big Stick.
Thank you, Chair. A couple follow-up questions. Actually, one specific follow-up question. We talked a little bit about fire guidelines. So one of the comments from one of the letters mentioned possible fire on the hillside itself. And I just kind of wanted to follow up with that and ask if this development potentially makes it more difficult to address a fire that might take place on the hillside. It seems reasonable to me that if there's more development on the hillside, that might, and more people, that raises the chances, not that that's anything that could be foreseen. But does the development itself make it more difficult to get to the hillside? And the follow-up on that question is, might it be appropriate to add an extra measure so that if there should be a fire on the hillside, it's easier to get to that fire, or it's easier to tap into water to put out the fire, something along those lines?
Deputy Chief Lauderdale, would you mind sharing your thoughts about the wildfire potential and response that in the relationship to this project, please?
Absolutely. We did look at that challenge, and it is a steep hillside, as you have observed. We did ensure that there is access from that site, and I don't believe at this point it'll be a problem, but we'll continue to evaluate it as we go through the development phase of this project.
Okay, and my concern was that if we need to add another condition of approval to address it, it strikes me that now might be that moment that we can do that. But it's taken well that constant evaluation is ongoing. while I was reading about design guidelines, what occurred to me was usually it seems like there's a bit in there about design guidelines being somewhat discretionary for the planning commission, but that I didn't seem to see that in the report this time around. Is it because for a project this size, design guidelines are far less discretionary, or was it just not put in, or did I miss something?
Yeah, I think you're referring, Commissioner Big Stick, to the introductory language that we typically put in. I think we just opted not to put it in this time. It wasn't an intentional change. Certainly the regulatory environment and the commission's discretion to interpret the design guidelines and apply them to the project is not modified in any way that's different than the standard method. So you retain whatever discretion you feel like you've had on the other projects to evaluate that issue.
Which I don't think has ever been a major concern previously. I was kind of curious in that vein. Apparently siding material and trim consistency was inconsistent as initially brought to us. Can you talk a little bit about what needs to be made consistent in order to bring it in alignment with those guidelines?
I found in reviewing the elevations of the project that the details of the varying siding materials and colors were different on the front elevations versus the side elevations. So just encouraging the project to carry those along all elevations in order to be in compliance with the guidelines.
Makes sense to me. Another of the comments we received had to do with garbage, and the idea being that garbage will be stored in the garages that are on the third floor and bringing them to the curbside. You know, it can be hard sometimes without the development directly in front of you to fully visualize what that journey might look like. I know how simple it is for me to bring my garbage cans to the curb. It's a relatively short walk. I was just wondering how arduous a trek it might be, especially for the further units to just get their garbage can to the side of the road, or if that's less of a concern than one might imagine.
So the storage for the garbage cans is actually on the first floor of each of the units. I would imagine that residents would use the pedestrian walkways that are in the front portion of the property to bring their garbage cans to the street. There's actually also a sheet on packet page 95 that shows that proposed route for the garbage cans. Or I guess the imagined route for your consideration.
I think that addresses that well. And then the last one was a very me-specific observation, because what occurred to me was that ingress driveway seems to be basically right next to the southernmost residence, the 513A. And what occurred to me as I was looking at that was, and again, I don't know what the traffic pattern is going to look like in real time, but it occurred to me that whatever noise is caused by that, and I read the noise report, it seemed like everything was more or less reasonable. But it struck me that if I were living in that house, I'm curious if there was consideration how much sound might be carrying from the driveway to that specific house.
An evaluation of the noise levels of traffic was not performed. I'm trying to think. Within the CEQA document, noise was evaluated during operation, and I know they found no significant impact. Rod, are you able to help me recall if there was any consideration of vehicle noise during I guess operation?
Yeah, I can help you out there. Sorry, I was fumbling with unmuting there. Yeah, so one of the one of the questions that the noise analysis tried to answer was whether there was a potential for a change in the noise level at existing residences. And so they did take into consideration, traffic noise from the project on adjacent land uses and sensitive receptors, and identified no significant increase in noise levels that would be significant per the thresholds. But they did identify that during construction, there would be potential for noise levels to be significant, and provided mitigation to reduce those levels to less than significant.
And Commissioner Big Stick, I think it's important as well to remember, in particular related to vehicle noise, distance is of course a very important factor, but so is speed. And so as Mr. Stinson mentioned, the change in the noise environment, it is likely the case that noise from existing higher speed traffic along Monterey may generate more noise during project operations than the very slow vehicle speeds entering and exiting the driveway. And so that's an important characteristic to keep in mind. Even though the driveway may be closer, the actual noise generated is likely to be lower.
I think my concern in large part had to do with the volume more than the noise itself. Because one or two cars every so often is one thing. You're talking about 8 units, and presumably they're 2-car garages for each unit. So however many actual trips are generated up that driveway per day, I don't know. But it struck me as potentially, and some neighbors are great and low key, and some neighbors are party animals, and that's at some point no longer in our purview. But it struck me that the potential sheer volume of trips generated up that driveway next to that house bore consideration enough that I should raise the concern. So as a former commissioner once put it, as not to be too cavalier with the neighborhood.
Sure. Well, I think I'm looking at the noise analysis. The noise analysis incorporated information from the traffic trip generation estimates for the project. They estimate 76 total daily vehicle trips. Certainly that's a small fraction of the daily traffic along Monterey that's traveling at higher speeds. So to the extent we're considering environmental impacts, the noise from the project is very likely to be analyzed as less than the existing noise environment along Monterey.
So essentially what you're saying is, since there are so many trips going on in front of that house anyway, what's being added by the trips up the driveway are negligible at that point?
To a certain respect, yes. Noise can combine in a significant fashion, but the number of trips is relatively small, and the speeds of those trips in and out of the driveway is low. And so that combined is not likely to have a significant noise impact.
Thank you very much. I have no further questions at this time.
Thank you, Commissioner Big Stick. Commissioner Berman, did you have some follow-up questions?
I did. Just a few on some items that Commissioner Big Stick brought up. I did note them down, but I was going to save them to see if they were covered. But I do want to touch on them. For fire, I do understand that the intent is to use the public right-of-way as the fire access, but I did notice that the closest fire hydrant to the site is across the street on Monterey. So this may be a question for Deputy Chief Lauderdale. I mean, just considering the fact that if there were fire, an engine would connect to the fire hydrant and then need to connect to the FDC for, I don't know if it's going to be a loop system or for each of the separate buildings. Is the distance feasible from fire hydrant to each of the units?
The requirement is that there's a fire hydrant within 400 feet of all portions of the building. And in this case, it met that requirement.
Okay, so there's, I guess, does the fire department just have hoses longer than 150 feet typical? Do they just have really long hoses, I guess?
That's correct. We carry several hundred feet of hose and are able to lay into the particular structure that may need a firefight.
Okay. I guess along that note, just out of curiosity, is each unit going to have its own FDC system connection?
No, we will put those in strategic locations. I believe that was one of the of approval that I had, is that we would approve each of those. And so at the design stage, when after the project is approved by the commission, when the designers begin to design the project, we work with them directly to determine what's based upon hydraulics and other factors, what the best design criteria will be.
Okay. Thank you. I think that was my main fire question, because I was wondering if it'd be applicable to install wharf hydrants on site, but so long as it's compliant with fire code, I'm okay. And then one other question, touching off of the garbage routes, I guess, for residents. I noticed that the anticipated paths kind of go over some stairs, which I don't think would be ideal. And that kind of led me to question which units are going to be ADA compliant. It might be a question better for the applicant, which I could save for the applicant, but I did want to point out that the logistics of bringing out the garbage bins to the road or the pickup locations, it seems pretty difficult. I don't think I would be able to carry my garbage bin down a couple of flights of stairs.
I don't know if there was going to be a response to that.
It wasn't a question. I think I'll save it for the applicant. I started looking at it again after Commissioner Big Stick's questions.
Thank you, Commissioner Berman. Commissioner Hauser.
Sorry, I just have one clarification to the tree replacement question that we kind of all spoke about. So I haven't been able to find where the one-to-one mitigation is required. I see the landscaping plan is required, but I'd like to kind of understand, maybe we can save that for later so no one's like poking around right now, but I do want to understand where the actual ratio is required. And then I also wanted to understand, is the replacement ratio just being required for the heritage trees or for all tree removals on the site?
It's just heritage trees that trigger the replacement plan. And if you give me just a second, I confirm where the one-to-one requirement is. If you guys want to move on, I can circle back to you on this one.
Sounds good. Maybe we'll go ahead and come back to you on that. I actually did have one more question, and it pertained to the affordable unit. This is one of those projects. Frankly, one of the two rare projects, in my opinion, where we have enough units being built where there's an affordability component that's brought to bear. And I just wanted to confirm that the unit that's going to be sort of designated as affordable is essentially going to be the same in terms of amenities and sort of quality, et cetera, as the other market rate units. Is that a correct assumption?
That's correct, Commissioner Niblin. It's actually a municipal code requirement that the unit have the same types of finishes. There are other standards as well about the placement of the unit within the development. And so it's something we look at very carefully to make sure it complies with those requirements.
Thank you. Commissioner Leal, I see your hands up.
Thank you. Yeah. I just have one question around on-street parking. It doesn't seem to be an issue, but or at least right now, But other than the two driveways, is there going to be any additional loss of on-street parking with either red curbs or anything else?
So the site, the site distance analysis that was performed for the driveway entrances do recommend for some red curbing to allow those site distances to occur. I believe it's about 25 feet off of the northern, the northern driveway, and between the northern and the southern, and then 10 feet on the north side of the northern driveway to maintain that site distance.
Okay, thanks.
Commissioner Big Stick.
Following on Commissioner Leal's question about how many parking spots in front of the development does that leave on street, approximately?
I haven't done that measurement. I think I can look at that and get you an answer.
Sure, and a real loose ballpark is fine too, but if you want to look it up, that's great.
Yeah, let me look it up.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Okay, well, after that marathon rounding there, we've come to the portion of the matter where we're going to go ahead and hear from the applicant, and our ordinary practice is to afford the applicant 10 minutes to present the project. A portion of that time can be reserved to respond to comments that might be made by the public with respect to the project. So I'll let the applicant indicate at the time that the applicant presents whether they want to reserve any of their time. But that's what we'll do now, and thereafter we'll go ahead and hear from the public with respect to the project. So why don't we go ahead then and have Mr. Chavarria or whomever it is that's going to present the project go ahead and do that at this time.
Quick note, I'll be keeping track of the timer and I'll give you a notification at 1 minute remaining.
Hey, good evening, commissioners. Javier Chavarria with JC Engineering. Before I go into the technical details, I'd like to give John Contrabecchi, the developer, for a quick introduction. Then I can concentrate on the technical aspects of the project.
Thank you. Go ahead.
John?
There we go. Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay. Good evening, commissioners and staff. My name is John Contrabecchi, and I'm the president of a company called TKG International. Vistamar is the first of several properties that we've acquired and we intend to develop as residential projects in Pacifica. And I wanted to take just a few moments to introduce myself and our company to you. TKG International has been in the development business for over 35 years, and we've have experience creating properties throughout the Bay Area, including Palo Alto and Cupertino, Santa Clara, San Jose, and Livermore. We've developed over 2 million square feet of office, R&D, industrial, and residential properties. And we have extensive land development experience as well, having developed land in Santa Clara, San Jose, and Livermore. And we've also developed a 135-acre wine grape vineyard. In developing the Vistamar project, I'm not only developing a town-owned development, but I'm also creating a home for myself and my family because I intend to retain one of the homes as my own. Now, our vision was to create a beautiful project designed to enjoy spectacular views of the Pacific Ocean. Since you've all been to the site, I'm sure you know that if you look west, you have unobstructed views of the ocean, and every home that we develop in the project will have unobstructed views. We are developing the home using an architectural statement that's modern and contemporary. And we're going to construct it in an environmentally responsible way using green methods and materials. The homes will be all electric with electric appliances and heating. There will be no gas used in the project. Each home will have solar panels. Each home will also have an electric charging station for electric vehicles. We'll have home automation where the homes will be responsive to the commands of Alexa. And lastly, each home will have rooftop decks that will also afford spectacular views of the Pacific Ocean. That's the vision, and Javier Chavarria, who leads our design team, will give you the details of the project.
Thank you, Mr. Contrabecchi. Mr. Chavarria, why don't you go ahead and continue?
Absolutely. Again, good evening, commissioners. Is it possible, Christian, to share my screen so that I can go with a small PowerPoint presentation to help bring the message across?
Give me just one moment to try to enable that, Mr. Chavarria.
Okay.
All right, can you try now?
Can you see my screen now?
We can see it, yes.
Excellent. Just to make sure, we have an overview of the front rendering of the project. Is that what we're seeing?
Yes.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, this is an overview, just a general picture rendering actually created from the design of the project of what we envision for the project to be. We started this venture, and as we've seen all the relevant items that keep coming up, the design concept, the traffic concerns, the grading, the geotechnical issues, drainage issues, and architectural design. Back in 2002, this is what the site used to look like. So that's when we first started working on the project. Very easy site, we figure, simple, no vegetation, which it's a living proof that the majority of the trees that we've been talking about are very young, multi-trunk trees that have developed in the last 15 to 18 years. So as what we thought the timing was an easy project, we took the very typical approach to put all the homes with driveways directly off Monterey Road. Immediately when we started the planning, we contacted a traffic engineer and a soil engineer to do the first analysis. And the traffic engineer immediately says, oh, hold it. This is not going to work. The number of driveways in such a winding road is going to create a driving hazard. You must come up with an alternative solution if you want to put those many units. We also started evaluating putting the garages from Monterey Road, and this red section in there shows the amount of grading that needed to be done in order to place the homes with driveways from Monterey. All the cut needed to be exported, and the volumes were substantially larger. So we figure, why don't we take advantage of the topography? We have a street that is dropping down very quickly, and we can put a driveway that goes fairly smoothly to the top. And what that does is create three different things. Number one, avoid all the traffic problems and all the traffic hazards that the previous design was creating. We will have a single driveway access that will put the garages on the back and allow the buildings to have a nicer and more beautiful facade. But most importantly, it diminished the amount of the grading. By placing the driveway, if we look at the previous section, the amount of cut that we had coming from Monterey compared to the amount of cut that we have with the driveway on top is reduced by about 40%. Not only that, we use certain design techniques so that we could dissipate some of the cut on site. We are placing fill in areas that are safe to do so. We create a proper engineered fill, and that will help us to reduce the amount of dirt needed to be exported to the site. So therefore, the putting of the driveway behind, it was not a problem. And the concern of the driveway creating too much noise, we have to remember that the driveway is also depressed. There is a retaining wall along the side, which varies from 3 feet to about 6 feet, that adds an additional buffering to the noise that may be created from the project. Then we're talking about possible geotechnical concerns. When we started the project in 2002 and we changed our design, the soils engineer says that is great because the majority of the area, not the majority, the entire area where we're putting the homes is sitting on greenstone, is sitting on solid material. And on this image that you're looking at, we see the FG and the QEF. FG is all greenstone. That's where the houses are sitting. The two borings that the soils engineer decided to do were in the areas that were a little questionable. Okay, they're not firm bedrock. We need to find out what we have. So on the right-hand side where the swell and the drainage has occurred, that is the softer area, and we purposely stayed away from that area. Not that it's unstable, but it's not the best suited area for the homes.
Mr.
And the
Chopper,
other,
you have 1 minute remaining.
I'm gonna move forward on that. So the soils report, then on the drainage, we have all the surface area, like a staff very clearly defined, control, manage, and we're gonna make sure that we comply with the requirements of the C3 regulations. John already talked on the green points of the building. These are the catch basins that were a concern. The catch basin that is in the lower section here is in a landscape area. And this other one is just a junction box that, so no water from the driveway will go into the storm drain system untreated. And then these are more up-to-date renderings describing very clearly how the buildings work. I think that we have achieved a very harmonious, clear, and good design that will be an asset for our community. And this is how the retaining walls are working on the side, how they're integrated with the hill, and how they actually provide some usable areas on the upper section. Even the northern part of the project that appears to have all those retaining walls that we're using as flow-through planters and landscape, I think they integrate really well and give us a project that we can all be proud of.
Mr. Chavarria, you're over 10 minutes at this point.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chavarria. So I think what we'll do then is go ahead and move on to hear public comment. And it's probable, frankly, that we'll have questions for Mr. Contrabecchi and Mr. Chavarria after we've had a chance to hear from the public. So Mr. Murdoch, I guess we'll look to you to help us go ahead and take public comment from folks who want to address the commission on this matter.
Thank you, Chair. At this point, we have 3 participants with their hands raised. A reminder for anyone participating by phone, *9 to raise your hand, and others in the app, click the raise hand at the bottom of the screen. At this point, I will bring in Kaya Gordon. Ms. Gordon, please go ahead. You'll have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Please go ahead.
Great. I do not live in this neighborhood, but I know people who do live. I'm struck by the number of similarities for this plan to the recently approved development, such as drainage issues, traffic issues, wildlife, trees, and huge retaining steep sides. I do not feel that a mitigated negative deck is appropriate here. What Pacifica badly needs is low housing, not expensive condos. Changes are happening really fast right now in our world. Some are not, but some of them are. This development centers on environmental destruction of one of Pacifica's beautiful hillsides to build expensive condos. And so I'm going to put this in as an existential question to the planning commissioners. Can you really look deep into your soul and say that this development would serve Pacifica? I hope the answer to that might be no. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Gordon. Mr. Murdoch, who's our next commenter?
Our next commenter will be Gail Benton Shoemaker. Please
Thank
go
you.
ahead.
I have can you hear me? Yes?
Yes, ma'am, we can. Go ahead.
Okay. My name is Gail Benton Shoemaker. I am part of a citizens group called Tree City Pacifica. As you know, last year, Pacifica was awarded the designation of Tree City USA. This was in part because of our heritage tree ordinance and the recognition of the value of trees, including the fact that trees combat climate change by sequestering and storing carbon, which is in alignment with the city's climate action goals. Trees also beautify our city and improve property values. The proposed logging of 57 trees will release carbon into the atmosphere and change the environment of the neighborhood. Often when a heritage tree permit is appealed and removal is allowed, it is under the condition that 3 trees are planted to replace each heritage tree. I would like to request that the Planning Commission require the developer of the Vistamar project to plant 3 trees, or a 3-to-1 ratio, for each heritage tree removed and 1 tree for each of the other 50 trees logged. This could mean that some of the trees will be planted in other locations, preferably in Pacifica. This condition would help mitigate the damage done by the logging operation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Benton Shoemaker. Mr. Murdoch, who's next to address us?
Next, we have Summer Lee.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
My name is Summer Lee. My partner, Catherine Clay, and I have lived at 520B Monterey Road for 20 years with our 2 young sons. We were the original owners in the development. In the face of the existential threat of climate change, I'm surprised to see this project being considered as is. This is a burdened property needing a full EIR to consider the possible irrevocable damage caused by the Vistamar development. The sheer amount of grading, native tree removal, retaining walls which are out of scale with the area, the lack of accounting for the already overburdened drainage in that area, not to mention the lack of analysis and reporting on erosion in an overly steep property, are all at the sake of these 8 ghastly condos squeezed into the landscape. The project involves a complex environmental change, and there are compelling reasons this land has not yet been developed. A mitigated negative declaration and MMRP provide the weakest environmental standards, putting the neighbors in the surrounding area at risk. The site happens to be where stormwater gathers at the bottom of 2 hills, where in the winter it's not uncommon to see rainwater gushing over the sidewalks and overflowing the existing street sewage systems. Standard drainage solutions are already failing this area, and the developer's proposed addition of drainage systems do not seem to be enough, especially after the land formation and native trees that naturally manage water are destroyed. There seems to be need for more investigation into how future significant excavation would detrimentally affect future drainage. There also has been no conversation yet of the landform change and its impact from the view from scenic Highway 1. Finally, up to the severe drought a few years ago, our home, which was significantly less into the hillside as the Vistamar project, had groundwater from perched water tables running into our foundation up into what was supposed to be a storage area, creating standing water and subsequent mold and mildew. There were a handful of other neighbors who experienced this and possibly continue to do so today. And of course, our contractor fought any meaningful repair until the warranty ran out. I also want to note that during the construction of our subdivision and possibly the result of it, the hillside across from our home belonging to the same hill and soil formation of the Vistamar project suffered a landslide. It was my understanding that this slide prevented the developer from continuing our subdivision into that area and was sold off and remains undeveloped to this day. I also wanted to add as a side note to Commissioner Big's questions that cars going up a graded driveway would create more engine noise than a car driving slowly on a level driveway. In sum, it troubles me that the staff of this Plan Commission of Pacifica would grant commission of this development without a further EIR. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you, Ms. Lee. Mr. Murdoch, next commenter, please.
Next, we have Christine Bowles.
Ms. Bowles, please go ahead. Ms. Bowles, are you there with us?
All right, let's try Claudia De Luna.
Good evening, commissioners and neighbors. My name is Claudia De Luna. I have lived here with my fiance for over 10 years. And I have to say that the proposed Mar Vista development project is a real concern to us. I will highlight the keynotes. You do have this email as well. Monterey Road already supports a high density of homes, so much so that parking and driving is a real concern. If you visited the neighborhood here, you'll see signs stating "Drive like your child lives here." So it's already an issue. The instability of the hillside and the large-scale soil removal and resulting retaining walls are of big concern. And as Commissioner Berman much more eloquently stated, if you walk down this towards the end of the bottom of the street, you see what I call the undercutting of the road and the erosion already. And so there's very real concern, which has been discussed at length here. The wildlife habitat, I think, will be severely impacted. This is an area where deer and coyote and even mountain lions frequent. Again, I mentioned the insufficient parking with the current density, and this is before Commissioner Leal mentioned the loss of parking for the unit. It will lead to problems. There's no doubt of that. Ingress and egress is already a danger in a very busy street, and this will just exacerbate the problem. The strain on the electrical and the sewage systems, I think, may be considerable. The electrical is already spotty. We've done quite a bit of discussion around the trees, and those are the loss of the trees, and that loss is considerable. In short, a full and complete environmental report is essential, we believe, before proceeding forward. Anything less is dangerous on such a burdened piece of land. We urge the Commission to complete an EIR and a holistic assessment of the overall impact to the Monterey Road community. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. De Luna. Were we able to get Ms. Lee?
Ms. Bowles, are you able to speak again?
Or Ms. Bowles, I'm sorry.
Hello? Oh, Alisa. Hello, this is Robert Bowles. Can you hear me?
We can hear you okay, yes.
Dad, you can hear you. Okay, sorry for the confusion. My name is Robert Bowles. I live at 478 Monterey Road, which is just downstream of the project site. I'm an architect with 40 years of experience with developments of residential projects. I have a couple of quick topics. The inadequacy of the geotechnical investigations. The original geotechnical report was done 18 years ago and is based on just 2 boring locations. 6 to 8 would be more typical in our experience for a project of this size. One of the borings was in the middle of the drainage swale along the south side, the other one done near the sidewalk. Neither one was done where the buildings will be located or where the excavations will be deep. The borings only went down 13 and 15 feet, not even close to the excavation depths of up to 35 feet deep currently planned for the project. One of the borings caved in and there was evidence of underground water and gravel layers that might lead to unstable hillside conditions. The geotechnical peer reviewer recognized these conditions and called for further studies and analysis. The project's consultant's response, however, says that further study ahead of construction is unnecessary. They are confident that they know what the deep soil conditions are and that their engineers will simply review the excavations as they occur during construction to see if they match the expected conditions. So essentially, the project sponsors want to rip away the forest and the topsoil, excavate down as deep as 35 feet, and then decide whether and how the project can be built safely. We believe further extensive and in-depth geotechnical investigations need to be conducted before granting project approval. Debris flow potentials. To paraphrase from the initial study report, the swale along the southern side of the project site and extends up the hillside area is filled with colluvial material and has been liberated in the past in the form of debris flow, which has traveled down the slope and been deposited out onto Monterey Road. The threat from debris flow down the ravine remains high and threatens development within or around the swale area. The geotechnical investigation recommends that the access driveway be designed to accept and convey debris flow materials out on the street as has occurred in the past. The project design does not do this. It builds the driveway over the swale and deflects debris flow into unfiltered catch basins to be maintained by the homeowners, and thence into public storm drains. When debris causes the catch basins to clog up, as they necessarily will, the flow is directed around the driveway and into a 1 foot wide channel immediately next to the neighbor's property. This seems to create a major liability for the city if landslide debris harms the neighboring property or shoots out onto Monterey Road at high speed. We believe the project should be redesigned to either avoid the swale area or use the wide driveway to carry potential debris flows as recommended. Regarding the hardscape and the roofscape and the drainage of the site, we believe it's nonsense that the runoff is the same as pre-construction. It's just complete nonsense. The basins that are provided are just 1% of the project site and would fill up in 45 minutes, and then the rest would go into the storm drain. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bowles. Mr. Murdoch, do we have other public comment?
We do. Next, we'll have Nimi Matthew.
I'm on the phone, so.
Hi, my name is Nimi Matthew, and I live uphill on Monterey from the proposed construction site at 517B Monterey Road. I share the concern that several citizens have brought up with respect to the trees being cut and wildlife being impacted, the drainage issues, and the increased traffic on Monterey. I would like to focus mainly on two areas. One is the risk of project abandonment and a permanently scarred landscape. Given the current volatility of our environment, there is a clear risk of regarding the financial stability and viability of this project. So I don't want us to, in the event of a bankruptcy or financial non-viability of this project, if this developer were to abandon the project, I wouldn't want to be in a situation where we have a scarred landscape. And I would like to hear what mitigations or guarantees will be made in place. My second concern is around the noise pollution during the construction period, particularly for those who work from home, any elderly that are at home, children, pets at home, with all the trees being cut, the grading and the construction. This will greatly impact the quality of our life and would like to hear more about what noise mitigations are being planned. I urge the Commission to seriously reconsider this plan given the impact to the environment and neighborhood and not approve this project. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you, Ms. Matthew. Mr. Murdoch, who's next?
Next, we have Chris and Kristen. Speaker, please identify yourself. Is there a speaker? You're identified as Chris and Kristen in the Zoom application.
Hi, can you hear us?
We can now, yes.
Okay, hi, my name is Chris. I was actually, real quick, there's two of us. Do we each get 3 minutes or just one person gets 3 minutes? I mean.
Each of you will have 3 minutes as long as you identify yourselves as different speakers.
Okay, this is Chris speaking. And, one of my main concerns is just the displacement of, wildlife and trees that has been already spoken about. And, there is a lot of trees and they are going to be, destroyed and taken away. And it is nice to be living here in a place that is full of trees and, to get that taken away for condominiums that, don't really need to be there. I don't know how it it improves anybody else's life but the developer, it seems at this point. And a lot of it seems to be just from what I heard in the discussion earlier, it was most of it is just bare minimums, and if there's a problem, there'll be fines to pay, and they'll just pay it. You know, it doesn't sound like it's something that will improve anybody's life but theirs. You know, and again, I don't mean to offend anybody, but that's just the way it feels here, and that's what I've got to say. And yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Chris. Was there anything else?
I was just wondering about an environmental report, if there has been one done to address, about the trees and the animals, just, it'd be good to know. Yeah.
Thank you. I understood that there was a Kristen also who was going to speak.
Hi, I'm Kristen.
Yes, please go ahead.
Hi, we live on Nelson Avenue, and we're one of the many properties whose backyard runs into the creek that would be impacted by this new construction. As pointed out by the Bowles' analysis of the project, the creek in this easement is not adequately handling existing runoff. And as it is designed now, the new construction would greatly compound the existing drainage and erosion issues, putting numerous homes, including ours, at significant risk. To argue that we'll be in better condition downstream after this development is put in place is respectfully offensive. I would like to second each and every issue that the Bowles laid out in their email sent yesterday to the commission. Together, the Bowles have decades of experience in the field, and when I read their analysis and concerns of the project, I became quite alarmed at what appears to be a hasty design on a burdened piece of property that thwarts basic construction practice in quite a few areas. These are serious issues that appear quite dangerous to the dozens of homes downstream of the project. The commission owes us residents much more due diligence and vetting than has been demonstrated thus far. For example, why hasn't the Planning Commission required this project to perform a thorough environmental report, as is common in projects of this nature and magnitude? To not seriously address these concerns and the environmental impact of this project seems negligent and hurried on the part of the Planning Commission. Obviously, these developments need to be balanced with the existing neighborhood and not designed at the expense of the neighborhood. This project could be a great opportunity to fix some of our long-standing and valid complaints regarding the existing drainage system and to create a project that works for the environment and everyone in the neighborhood. But it needs far more review and input from those of us that will have to live with it. Thank you.
Thank you, Kristen. Mr. Murdoch, are there other comments?
There are, Chair. Next, we have Elisa Bowles.
Oh, sounds like there's a bit of an echo. Can you hear me okay?
We can, go ahead.
Okay. Hi, my name is Elisa Bowles. I live at 478 Monterey Road. I'm currently a PhD student at Stanford in environmental engineering, and I'm opposed to this project as currently designed. The proposed site just up the hill from my home supports wildlife and native plants. It is a corridor for animals to travel from the mountain ridges above to the creek that runs behind my house. The slope of the site on the southern end adjacent to 513A Monterey Road is noted on the survey as a drainage easement. If you've walked there, you will have noticed that it is much more than a natural depression for water to flow. It's a rich landscape with very different plants than the rest of the site. I believe it to be an area technically known as riparian, a seasonal wetland. Even now, the soil is very wet here towards the bottom where it pools and funnels into a city drain. This presence of water means that it supports very different species of plants as well as animals that obtain their water here. The required environmental studies through CEQA must be completed and peer reviewed before any peer permits are granted. The project drawings seem to completely ignore the recorded drainage easement. The main entry driveway for the complex goes right through this area, paving over the natural swale right where it flattens to host these species. I would like to see the easement modified before the subdivision map is approved. Furthermore, the project is currently designed as basically a brute force design that ignores the existing topography and ecology and does not even attempt to save anything existing within the areas of work. Even the topsoil contains many invisible microorganisms that contribute to the health of the area. Between the cut and fill, almost 10,000 cubic yards are being disturbed. That's basically filling a tennis court 90 feet high. We chose to move here because we see Pacifica as a unique community that really cared about its incredibly special setting along the California coast. Projects of this scale destroy not only the natural landscape at the local site, but will transform Pacifica for years to come if they are allowed to build in this manner. Besides advocating for you to vote against this project, I would strongly recommend that the city revisit its planning code that allows this much site disruption. Most other cities have grading limits and also define height limits from natural or finished grade. In Pacifica, it's apparently allowed to dump 30 feet of fill and then build 35 feet on top of that. How is this helpful in preserving our environment and protecting from future damage from climate change? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bowles. Mr. Murdoch, who's our next commenter?
Next, we have Madhu Matthew.
Thank you. Please go ahead.
Hi, thank you guys for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Madhu Matthew, and I live on Monterey Road, 517B, which is a couple of houses up the proposed project site. I have to be honest with you, I'm a newbie with this whole planning commission meeting, still a newbie. I don't have all the technical background, but I want to raise 2 points today. Like many have mentioned, this project is drastically altering the natural landscape. All along Monterey Road, you have dense buildings, and this is the one green space that's out there today. And this project will completely eliminate that, take out all the trees, and there's huge amount of topsoil and other soil being removed. I believe 3,000 cubic yards is a number that I read. That number, it stays a little abstract initially, but when you think about it, it's like 200 truckloads of soil being moved and dug and moved out. So it kind of completely is altering that landscape and the topology of it. And it's a very steep site. And I can't help wonder, once you start, cutting all the trees and moving the soil around, how do we know there won't be any adverse event happening, like a landslide or something like that? So that's one of my concerns. The second one is around storm runoff. It's very hard for me to understand how the study has come to the conclusion that a natural ecosystem that absorbs rainwater that is today in place, um, the effect after the whole project is built, there will not be any a different runoff. I'm failing to understand that analysis completely. A natural ecosystem, as far as I know, as a layperson, is able to handle rainwater much better. And the planters and everything else that is proposed on the site doesn't seem proportional at all. So that is another concern I have. With climate change, you are expected to have sudden and heavier precipitation events. And I worry about all the runoff, and especially people living downhill on Monterey, and how that will affect their lives. So again, I would request the commission to take these two things into consideration. And thanks again for your time today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Matthew. Mr. Murdoch, who's next?
Next, we have David Bowles.
Hello, can you hear me all right?
We can.
Great. I'm David. I also live at 478 Monterey Road. I'm currently studying engineering at Brown University, and I'm also opposed to this project as currently designed. I'd like to focus my input tonight on the retaining walls. Obviously, this is a steep site that requires retaining walls to hold back the soil so that relatively level areas can be created for building pads, paths, and driveways. Because there's so much grading in the plan, in this particular plan, walls are needed on all sides of the site. One retaining wall against some of the units is 25 feet tall, and behind units 5 and 6, there's a series of 5 walls stepping up 35 feet from the driveway with only 2 feet of separation between them. That would leave only about 16 inches of width for planting, and I'm not sure that's enough to support vegetation, much less give a gardener enough walking space to tend it, especially if they're trying to balance 30 feet in the air. Right alongside the property line, within the 5-foot setback, there's another 12-foot wall. Bonnie O'Connor directed us to the planning code section, which would limit this to 6 feet, except that regulations for retaining walls are lumped on alongside fences and hedges, which results in their height being measured from the side with higher ground level. This makes absolutely no sense to me. I can't really see how a 12-foot retaining wall can be considered to have zero height. Despite how they're written, though, there's currently mistakes on the grading plans, even after others have been fixed, showing that the top of that wall is 7 feet higher than the existing grade, which is above the 6-foot limit, as I just said. I'm sure this is a mistake, but I can't really see how this has continued through the planning process. It doesn't seem like it's being reviewed very carefully. Finally, this wall is so high that additional support is going to be needed. And the geotechnical report calls for soil anchors going back into the retained earth, but because this is alongside the property line, that would extend into another property, and there's no mention of easements being procured or other alternative support methods in the proposed plan. And then similarly, gravel backfill would extend onto another property to relieve the water pressure from building up behind that wall. So it's not clear to me how this wall would be built safely or legally. In conclusion, purely considering the retaining walls, the current form of this plan seems to create a landscape of barren concrete to rely on what appears to be loopholes in the municipal planning code and to not have been reviewed thoroughly by the city and to not even include enough detail to be reviewed thoroughly. As such, I do not believe it should be approved at this time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Bowles. Mr. Murdoch, next commenter.
Our next speaker is Gary Benjamin.
Can I be heard? Can you people hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. Yeah, I just want a couple of points. I just wanted to, regarding an earlier commenter who mentioned about the possibility of what, given the volatile economic climate, what if the project starts and the hillside is stripped and then it winds up collapsing? The development company declares bankruptcy. Based on what I've read, TKG International has already been through one bankruptcy. And, if we were left with a naked hillside, that would be up to the city to clean it up. The other point is, there's been mention of the fact that the borings taken to judge the solidity of the hillside have not been adequate. Only to, I'm not a technical person in this, but if the project goes ahead and then years down the road, the hillside does collapse and the whole project ends up in the middle of the street, I'm wondering who is going to be responsible for the costs involved. Is that something that the city then has to pay for any mitigation? It is obviously very close to the San Andreas Fault, and so even with the leaving aside the fact that it seems like the tests have been inadequate, geologists and everything, mistakes are made, and sometimes things it seems to me to be a very risky site. So I think that needs to be considered, and a plan needs to be made as to what if it doesn't, the soil erosion turns out to be much more of a problem than is currently being stated. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mr. Benjamin. Mr. Murdoch, our next speaker, please.
We don't have any other speakers with hands raised at this point. A reminder for those at home, click the raise hand button in the Zoom application, or if you're dialed in by phone, press *9 to raise your hand. At this point, we'll try Christine Bowles again. Ms. Bowles, are you intending to speak?
Yes. Sorry, can you hear me? I'm sorry, we're having a little technical difficulty. I was trying to call in from my phone too. So my name is Christine Bowles. I also reside at 478 Monterey Road. I want to start by saying that we are not NIMBYs. As licensed practicing architects, my husband Bob and I work with developers and homeowners all over the Bay Area. We are not against development, especially when it can be designed in a way that is sensitive to the site and its natural features, including topography, drainage, and ecology. This project is currently designed fails to address any of these issues, in my opinion. It's unfortunate that the developer did not consider a smaller project. 3 custom homes on pier foundations could be built with similar profit margins without necessitating all the earth moving and concrete work, and without the complete destruction of the majority of the site. A smaller project would fit into the surrounding neighborhood and not increase traffic congestion and noise and water runoff, as the paving amounts could be reduced by about half. With the new ADU regulations the state adopted this year, you could potentially build double the units, so those 3 homes could become 6 without adding parking, and this would create more affordable housing as well with smaller units. My main concern for this project is erosion, both of the site itself as well as the potential impacts of erosion down the hill where we live. While the project proposes catch basins to filter the water, we haven't seen where water would be stored on site to slow the flow before it reaches the city drainage system. I really believe full grading and drainage plans should be done before this project goes any further in the process. I sent you all a letter documenting our concerns and uploaded photos, videos, and previous communications with the Public Works Department about the inadequacy of the existing infrastructure on Monterey Road and Big Inch Creek. If additional erosion is caused by this project, who would be responsible to mitigate the damage and pay reparations to homeowners for the damage, loss of use, and potential reduced value of our properties? Historically, the city has been responsible for removing buildings that are no longer considered habitable when erosion takes place, as seen with the buildings along the oceanfront when the owners and developers file for bankruptcy. Are you willing to take that legal and financial risk without doing your homework and requiring a full EIR? Are you gaining enough money in tax revenue from this project to offset these potential costs to mitigate the damage and pay reparations to homeowners for the damage? The planning department is recommending approval with a mitigated net declaration. We believe the mitigations proposed are not enough given the burdened and sensitive nature of the site. It is, of course, your right to approve that tonight, but I want to make it clear that enough neighbors are so concerned about the impacts to our surrounding properties that we're prepared to appeal this project to the City Council and in the courts if necessary. When this gets litigated, we'll make sure to point out that the city refused to do its homework by requiring a full EIR.
Thank you, Ms. Bowles. Mr. Murdoch, do we have any other speakers?
Not at this time, but Mr. Luttringer, he had his hand raised, and there we go. He's raised it again.
Oh, yes, of course.
Can you hear me?
We can. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I own the property directly below this development site on 355 Norfolk. And I have no expertise in the area, but I just had a couple of questions. I'm not really sure how to read a lot of the maps and so on and so forth, but how much of the existing hillside would exist if this development were to go forward? I mean, would the hillside be taken up to 50%, or would it be the whole hillside that would come under construction? And in regards to what a previous speaker had mentioned in regards to I guess accountability, I was wondering if things don't go as planned as far as the drainage and there's a little bit more runoff that the natural environment takes care of now. I mean, who is ultimately liable for, we're directly underneath this project. If water damage were to occur, would the city be liable? And, I mean, just in general, I just think the neighborhood loses a lot of its uniqueness and charm when the environment is replaced by cement. Anyway, that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Mr. Luttringer. Mr. Murdoch, are there any other speakers?
Not at this time, Chair. Once again, anyone participating, please click the raise hand button if you're in the Zoom application, or press *9 on your telephone if you're dialed in. We have Raina Heights.
Please go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
I'm also new to this. Hi, good evening, commissioners and neighbors. My name is Raina Hines, and I'm an environmental social scientist. I grew up here, and I've resided at my property, which is actually just below. I'm at 335 Norfolk, at the corner of Norfolk and Monterey, and I've been here on and off for the past 30 years. So I'm right downhill from the proposed project, and I do have consistent erosion in my backyard, which we've been clearing up over the past 30 years. So that is a major concern of mine. So Anyhow, though in the past I've worked as a biologist serving and supporting EIAs and EISs, everyone prior has covered all the technical points that I think are vitally important. So I'm going to offer a cultural ecosystem service perspective. As someone who now works with communities being displaced globally for climate change, development, and otherwise, I'm blown away that this project is back up for proposal right in my backyard, where I've grown up observing wildlife such as deer, raccoon, possum, and coyote, which I've currently noticed are in increasing numbers. I also know that there are some nesting owls, I think, around this area, and some red-tailed hawks. So it really provides evidence to me that this zone serves as a wildlife corridor with all the potential wildlife that's getting squeezed out from other green zones in the Bay Area that are being rapidly developed. So I think for me, another aspect I can speak to is just the equity and access to outdoor environments. For me, this is my home, my sense of place, and what connected me to my career and passion in environmental work and sustainability. I love having grown up along the ocean and with close access to green space, which drove my passion and involvement towards this coastal and marine conservation. Over the years and upon returning permanently, I've been particularly proud of the progress that Pacifica has made towards sustainability. And we need to preserve what cultural ecosystem services we have as a community. As a woman of color who grew up here, I think it's particularly poignant during this time of extreme income inequality and lack of affordable housing in the Bay Area, in the times of Black Lives Matter, George Floyd, and attempting to shift the paradigm in DEI, that this project will impact communities of color. Right here at home, the reason I got involved in this work and decided to return is because Pacifica promised sustainability and sustainable growth in comparison to other Bay Area cities. I believe there are supporting ecosystem services right here and cultural services that are overlooked. Communities of color came to Pacifica in the 80s seeking affordable green space, and they found value, that this sense of place contributes. There was connection to appreciation for nature and increased health for a lot of people. There are lots of other things I can speak to, noise pollution that I think will increase. People fly down these hills. I think that's definitely going to increase for us here. But with that, I'd like to request a full, complete EIS or EIA be done in the winter or spring to better understand the true environmental impacts. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hines. Mr. Murdoch, do we have any other speakers?
Not at this time, Chair.
Okay. I think what we'll do then is, in light of the number of comments, and perhaps as a means of maybe avoiding questions that the commission might ask anyway, I think I'm going to ask whether or not the applicant, notwithstanding the applicant used all 10 of their minutes, if they want to take 3 or 4 minutes to address some of the matters that have been raised by the commenters. I'm just going to exercise my prerogative to do that. If the applicant wants to take a few minutes to address some of the issues that we've heard about, that they can go ahead and do that now.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, this is John Contravecchi, the project developer. There are a couple of points I'd like to address. Several people asked the question of why was the project delayed from 2002 until the present? And the answer is that the development company that originally acquired the land and proposed development was composed of 6 investors, 4 of whom were, let's say, older people like me. And unfortunately for them, 2 things happened. Between 2002 and 2005, we went through a recession, and it was too risky for them to pursue the development of the property. And then also from 2009 to 2015, we went through the Great Recession, when once again it was too risky for anybody to build a home development project anywhere. And between 2002 and 2015, something very unfortunate happened to 4 of the 6 original investors. They died. They died of natural causes. And their families chose not to proceed with the development because they didn't understand the development business, and it was something that was that involved challenges that they were not prepared to manage. I got involved in this project several years ago when I learned that it was a project that was stalled because of the fact that 4 of the 6 investors were no longer involved due to their passing. And I began taking steps necessary to revitalize the project and began working with Javier Chavaria to redesign the project significantly so that it would be a better project than what had previously been contemplated. So that's the reason for the delay. The second point I'd like to address is the question that was raised by several people about financial viability. I have been in the real estate business for more than 35 years, and in my career, I've probably financed, I don't know, $500 million worth of projects. I'm an expert in real estate finance. We acquired this land with all equity. There's no mortgage on the property now. Once we get the project approved and we go into the actual design of the project from a technical point of view, I will arrange a construction loan with a bank that will provide the construction financing. Now, the construction loan will be controlled by the bank, and the bank will require me to bring in a reputable general contractor to do the building. When the project, and all of this takes place, by the way, before a single spade of earth is turned, the bank will take a security interest in the land. And when the project construction begins, it'll be the bank that will be paying the contractor to do the construction work. Now,
so Mr.
let's say that
sorry, we're at,
I died.
Mr. Contrabecki, we're at more over 3 minutes at this point. I just wanted to give you a few minutes to sort of generally address some of the.
Okay, my point is basically that the project is very financially viable, and even if I were to die, it would continue on without me, and the bank would provide the funding to see that the project would be completed.
Okay, thank you.
There's one other point I wish to make, and that is, I heard a legal threat from one of the people making comments, and I want to explain that I'm not only a real estate developer, but I'm a practicing lawyer. And as an attorney, I comply with the law whenever I get involved in a development project. I don't deviate from it. And I consider the law to be my friend, because if I comply with the law, then my own rights are protected. And I want the Planning Commission to know that I play by the rules, always have and always will. And I think if you consult with the planning staff, you'll see that that has been my practice in all of my dealings with them. I play by the rules. So if a legal threat will go nowhere.
Well, we truly appreciate your feedback on that. So I'm going to go ahead then and bring it back to the Planning Commission, and going to close out the portion of the proceedings that deals with public comment and public testimony. So at this point, we'll move on then to deliberation by the commission, and this would be the opportunity for the commission to deliberate, make comments, ask questions as they see fit. Commissioner Hauser, you were the first to have your hands up.
Thank you. So I have a lot of opinions, but I think I'll save them. I first want to ask a couple of questions of the applicant. And I'm wondering if it would be acceptable to have Mr. Chavaria put the first slide that he showed. It was a rendering. It was a street view that I don't think was contained in the packet. I wanted to see that rendering again.
Sure. Why don't we ask Mr. Chavaria to go ahead and share that rendering with us again. There we go. Please go ahead.
So what my question is, I'm looking at the project plans and I'm looking at this rendering, and perhaps I'm missing it, but is this an accurate rendering of what's being proposed? Because I don't see the 4 or 5 retaining walls along the north portion of the property. It looks like shrubs. And so I guess my question is, are these retaining walls or shrubs?
This one?
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Actually, that's a more accurate view of. Okay. That was my first question. And then I wanted to reiterate the question that I asked to staff, which was, the grade differential between the public sidewalk and the pads is in this area. How far above the public sidewalk does the building roof fall overall? So what's the overall height from the public street here?
Is that a question for me or staff?
For you.
Okay. Street level here. Street level at this point is elevation 962. The pad elevation is 24 feet higher than the street. And then the building is below the high limit, is 33 foot 6 inches from the lowest point where the building meets grade. So if you were to take the worst condition from the lowest point of the street, 962, to the peak of the roof, it will be approximately 50 feet. But the building is set back 26 feet from the street.
Can you tell me how much solar per home you are proposing?
How much? I'm sorry. How much what?
This might be a question for Mr. Contrabacchi, but how much? What's the size of your solar system per unit? Is it a 2 kilowatt system? Like, what's the proposed solar?
We haven't designed yet the final solar, but we are certainly trying to maximize what we can do with the solar systems. Our goal is to have a net zero project. As I said, the final and formal designs have not been completed yet.
As far as utility questions, are you guys planning to have one sewer lateral per unit? It wasn't shown on the plans.
There will be a main collector line running inside the property, and that main collector line will connect directly to one of the manholes downhill. So it will not connect to the main section of the sewer in there. We will have an independent parallel system running inside the property, connecting to the manhole. That is, I'll go to the utility plan so I can show you that.
So, yeah, I'd like to see it on the utility plan. I am not an engineer by practice, so you may need to explain this to me, but if there's some sort of issue with the sewer, is that issue going to affect all 8 units at once?
No, absolutely not.
Okay.
Absolutely not. The sewer that is an 8 inches line, which is plenty of capacity for 20 homes or more. So we have an 8-inch line that connects to this manhole, goes into the property and runs the entire length of the property. And it has manholes just like if it was on the street, separated no more than 150 feet with a proper clean out. So each building has a separate lateral going onto that main line that runs along the front of the building and connects to the sewer manhole at this location.
And then the water connection along the south of the project, I didn't quite see that very clearly on the plans, and it wasn't clear to me if the connection was over the southern property, the property to the south. And I zoomed in as far as I could get. It still wasn't quite clear. So can you explain how that works?
Yes, we've been in close contact with the North Coast County Fire Department. And in order to calculate the actual demand for the project, we need to design all the fire sprinkler systems. We haven't done that. We're not there yet. So the water district will direct us to the best and proper location of the lateral, depending on the demand of the entire system and depending on the volume and the pressure that they currently have available. In conversations with the North Coast County, they have no problems, no issue with water pressure, and they should be able to facilitate the proper connection for firefighting and for domestic use.
Okay, and then my last question is for Mr. Contrabecchi. So I've heard a lot of questions from the public about trees. And you've heard the Planning Commission have a lot of questions about trees and the existing sidewalk. And I'm wondering, you know, what your take on the mitigation ratio is. Would you be willing to increase that mitigation ratio? Would you be willing to improve the public right of way with trees or you know, an up to date sidewalk?
First of all, regarding the heritage trees, we're happy to agree to replace them one for one. As for the remaining trees that are being removed, I would prefer to defer to the landscape architect and the arborist, and the reason why is because the trees that are planted on the site have to work with the overall site design from an aesthetic point of view, and also they have to be able to have a good opportunity to survive and thrive. Just packing in a bunch of trees on a hillside is not good practice. It's a skill, it's an expertise that I don't have. So I would recommend that in terms of tree replacement, we defer to the arborist and the landscape architect. And one other thing I'd like to mention regarding the heritage trees. I was informed by the arborist that before any final decision is made on transplanting a heritage tree, we need to bring in a company that specializes in transplanting large trees. And you know, Davy Tree Company is one, for example. There are several in the Bay Area. They use very heavy equipment. And there's an issue of safety here. If you know, they tell me that they can do it and they can do it safely, then we'll go and do it. We don't have an objection to it. But safety considerations have to be at the top of the list.
Okay, and so any comment on the idea of street trees or a public right-of-way improvement that could enhance the area for the neighborhood?
I'm a little unclear by what you mean by street trees. Are you talking about trees planted along the street in front of the property?
Yes.
Again, you know, if there's an appropriate place to put them, I'm all for it. But I don't have the expertise to make that judgment call. You know, we've all seen many situations in neighborhoods where trees have been planted in an inappropriate location, only to have the roots lift the sidewalks up and turn the sidewalks into hazards. That's the kind of thing I'm talking about. I would defer to the landscape architect and the arborist for guidance on what would be appropriate. But in principle, I have no objection at all.
That's all of my questions, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Hauser. Commissioner Berman.
Thank you. I'll start with my questions for the applicant, and then I also have additional questions for staff. So kind of a quality of life question for the future residents at the property. Back to the garbage route. I don't know if you recall, I had a quick comment at the beginning of our meeting. I was wondering the logistics of residents in units 1 through 4. Their garbage routes appear to need to go down quite a few flights of stairs. Is there an alternative to that?
Javier, can you respond?
Yes, I'm actually looking for the drawing that shows the garbage bag. So units 5 through 8, they really have no problem at all. They can very easily access the walkway and the sidewalk through that little front path. Even unit 3 and 4 can access the ramp that is located between unit 5 and 6 and have no problem just pulling down. So basically, we're talking about a 40-foot walk to take that onto the sidewalk. On unit 1 and 2, yes, it may present a little challenge as we have a little higher climb between the units and the road. If you notice that we did the retaining walls in an angle in such a manner that we are gaining more elevation from the path where the building is into the street. We have those 3 sections of stairs, and we have planters that run along the side. Once that we have a well-designed and engineered system for the retaining walls, I think that we can easily accommodate a ramp that will bring unit 1 and 2 to the pad level of unit 3. So right now, between unit 1 and 2, there is only 3 steps to bring from the pad of unit 1 to the pad of unit 2. And then unit 2 can easily access the pad level of 3 and 4. So it is a little longer of a walk, but it can, basically we can practically eliminate any steps within the path of the garbage.
Okay. I guess I'll talk to my fellow commissioners and then staff about potentially if we can incorporate that inclusion with this project. And then also at the terminus of the garbage collection area along the sidewalk, what's the intent? So I know where I live, we place our garbage in the, but I do understand at this site, we can't impair the site triangle for these driveways, and a recycle bin would exceed, it would impair it because it's taller than 3 feet. So where are the garbage bins intended to be placed? I mean, I'm sure you don't have a trash management plan yet, but I wouldn't be satisfied with the garbages being placed on the sidewalk nor in the landscaping. And then I don't know if it's safe to place them in the gutter.
Well, just like every other house in town, the garbage cans will be accommodated in the front area. We do have a few candidate areas that can easily be adapted to accommodate all the garbage bins. We have a section in front of unit number 3 that is about 25 feet long. It's not on the path of any of the stairs. That can be designated for placement of garbage cans. And we also have an island that goes behind the sidewalk and behind the sidewalk in the little driveway section that goes in front of units 7 and 8 that can also be designated for the temporary placement of the garbage cans for collection purposes only, just overnight.
Okay, so it looks like you're willing to accommodate the design changes, but maybe it needs to be thought out a little bit more.
Absolutely.
Okay, and then also quality of life at the site. I noticed that the guest parking stalls are parallel parking stalls. And then the terminus of the on-site road, it doesn't quite have a turnaround. It doesn't get wider for a turnaround. It looks like it's, I don't know, like 28 feet wide. I'm wondering if it's feasible to look at placing a turnaround there just for convenience and avoiding collisions with unit 1's garage or the walls.
Basically, we actually visited that idea, and putting a turnaround there presented 2 negative impacts. The first one, of course, increased the amount of excavation and retaining walls needed. But number 2, it also promoted people from going there and parking, like it happens in most cul-de-sacs, that people go park and then leave their cars in there and actually create more of a problem. The width of the driveway right now, you will be parking like if you're going to Safeway. When you go to any parking area, you have a driveway in between that is 25 feet wide. That's what the parking regulations require for parking at 90 degrees. So our driveway here complies with that requirement for 90-degree parking. So we have sufficient turning radius. You're coming forward, you drive into your unit, you back out of your garage, and then you can drive forward towards the street.
Right. Yeah, I got that. But the fact that the guest parking stalls are parallel parking stalls, it's not 90-degree parking. So I was just thinking mainly for those guest parking stalls, especially people that are not familiar with the site, they don't live there, they're guests. Imagining if it were myself in my big car driving to the end of that, I'd probably have to make a 6-point turn to get out.
Yeah, that is a very good point, and we'll be more than willing to find a viable solution for that. Perhaps we can use some of the common space area here to create a section, perhaps not a full compliant turnaround, but something that will create some sort of a hammerhead that somebody can back in and proceed forward easily.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I think quality of life at the site, and then for safety of guests visiting, that would be a good thing to look into. Thank you. Those are my questions for the applicant, but I have a couple more for staff. It looks like there's a few locations where there's walls in the setbacks. Does the city typically allow for walls in the setbacks?
Retaining walls?
Retaining walls.
Yes, they are permitted in the setbacks.
Okay. There was mention of tree replacements in other locations, maybe outside of the property. I thought that was an interesting idea. Has the city ever done that? Have any projects ever volunteered to plant trees, maybe on city land elsewhere?
Maybe Christian has some thoughts of if a project has identified another alternative location for tree replacement, but the in lieu fee, in effect, would have that same impact. But sorry,
okay.
senior planner Murdoch might have more to offer.
I'm not familiar with a project in the city that has incorporated such offsite tree replacement. There are a number of practical issues that would need to be worked out to implement that type of activity, and it's something that has not been evaluated as part of this project.
Okay. Associate Planner O'Connor, the in lieu fee, actually, I didn't think of that. That answers my question. That makes sense. So it looks like, so the geotechnical report was developed in 2002, and there have been subsequent letters for updates to the geotech report, but it appeared that the most current update was 2014. For the building permit process, does the city usually require a more current geotech report within a year or so?
So the original geotech report was prepared in 2002. An update letter was prepared in 2015, as you stated. Since then, though, as part of the CEQA review process, Rainey had hired a geotechnical firm to peer review the 2015 report. And through that review, they were able to do their analysis for the CEQA, the geo and soils evaluation to determine the less than significant impacts with mitigation measures incorporated.
And Commissioner Bertman, what you'll typically see if the project's approved and moves on to a more detailed design phase is when the particular structural details of the various project features become known, you'll see in the building permit review process requests for update letters on various specific technical items. And commonly what happens is, even though the geology doesn't change meaningfully, even from 2002 in this case, as far as the underground geology, there may be superficial landslides and so forth that are observed, but the geology of the site is not markedly changing. But what does change over time are the code requirements applicable to that observed geology. And so what you might see is the recommendations in an earlier geotechnical report based on the 2007 California Building Code, for example. The update letter, or the plan check comment rather, will say something like, update assumed values to 2019 building code standards and issue update letter. And so the geology remains the same, the standard changes, and the update letter draws the line in the connection between the two.
Okay, thank you. That makes me feel more comfortable. I know there are a lot of comments about that. And then also, can you explain the city's bond process? I know the applicant already answered for some of the questions regarding confidence in the completion of the construction of the project, but does the city also have a bond process ensuring public improvements are built?
Sure. So if this project is approved, there really are two different phases to think about. There's a subdivision improvements phase, given that there's a tentative subdivision map, and there's a project development phase, so the buildings, if you will. The city does have an established process for subdivisions, and either requires that the subdivision improvements be completed, or requires approval of a subdivision improvement plan, and requires appropriate financial assurance, typically in the form of a bond, but potentially in the form of a cash deposit, to ensure that subdivision improvements like grading and retaining walls and infrastructure installation and so forth are completed to specifications, so that we don't have the case that's been described where significant scarring of the hillside occurs. And so that particular mechanism is in place in the city's process. The second part of the process with the development of the structures, there's not typically a bonding process for that. So what you would see in the event that a project is initiated and not completed is the city's typical police power exercise through a nuisance abatement process. And so what that does entail is pursuing the property owner for completion of the improvements or removal and making the site safe. It happens infrequently, and so there's not typically an established concern on the part of city staff that would occur, but it does occasionally occur, and there are mechanisms in place outside of the financial assurance mechanisms that you're referring to.
So we could feel confident that if the subdivision map gets recorded and construction commences, that either a financial commitment or a nuisance violation will ensure that the site is brought to a safe state, correct?
I believe that's correct. Those processes are in place and part of the city's municipal code.
Okay, thank you. Then also, I know that the project is required to comply with the MMRP, and the negative declaration review was done, the initial study. But can you please explain why this site doesn't qualify for an EIR process? For a full EIR?
Bonnie, do you want to answer the question?
Yeah, sure. I can start, and maybe Mr. Stinson can follow up. But so an EIR is triggered when a project is when it's thought that a project may have potential significant impacts that may not be mitigated to a less than significant impact. This project, as we have shown through the ISMND, that the impacts of the project can sufficiently be reduced to a less than significant impact. EIRs are a more thorough environmental review document that usually address projects that may not be able to be mitigated to a less than significant impact.
And I think the key distinction here is that I would argue that typically the technical evaluation in an EIR may not be particularly more sophisticated. I think there's an impression of that. What is entailed is a more robust process to consider alternatives. And that's particularly important when, as Ms. O'Connor mentioned, some environmental impacts may not be mitigated to less than significant levels. And so it gives the decision makers alternatives to consider that may result in lesser impacts, even if all of those impacts could not be mitigated to a less than significant level. When it comes to a situation like this, where the technical studies have determined that mitigation measures are possible to reduce impacts to less than significant levels, it's not necessary to consider alternatives for purposes of minimizing environmental impacts. And so that's the real distinction in my mind. The consideration of alternatives under an EIR, because in any case, you're going to have potentially significant environmental impacts. Whereas with an MND, you've not identified any potential significant impacts that are not able to be mitigated.
Okay, thank you. There were a lot of comments on that. And then 2 last questions. Thanks for everyone's time. Regarding the COAs, so COA, let's see, 30 implies that the treatment facilities need to be redesigned. Are the treatment facilities as proposed for stormwater treatment, sorry, for C3 compliance and stormwater treatment, are the facilities not currently sized appropriately?
Senior Engineer Duncanus, do you want to touch on that, or I guess I can start it. So at current design, as shown in the plans, they are not meeting the C3 requirements. These plans have been reviewed by our stormwater consultant, and they believe that with a confirmation of calculations and the addition of capturing stormwater at the lower driveway areas, that this project will be able to meet C3 requirements without significantly changing what's shown on the plans.
That is correct. During the review process, we missed a small portion of the driveway that's needs to be treated. So we're going to take care of that during the COA process and the next round of review.
So then, independent of that small section of the driveway, the rest is relatively, to the best of our knowledge, C3 compliant?
Yes, when we take care of this small portion, 100% of the disturbed areas will be treated with stormwater measures.
Okay. And then last question is about COA 29. This COA implies that the applicant still needs to study the existing storm drain capacity, but kind of touching back to my question earlier in the meeting, it sounded like the applicant already confirmed that the existing storm drain system on Monterey is sufficient to accept the runoff from the property, also because the runoff is not anticipated to be significantly increased from the existing runoff. Can someone explain the need for this COA then?
Yeah, we developed this COA and then the applicant provided us with the storm water calculations just like last week.
Oh, okay, got it. So it's very recently been determined that the existing system has capacity for the development.
That's correct.
I think it's, Commissioner Berman, it's important to remember that contemporaneously, this condition may not feel like it's sensible. But imagine this project, for whatever reason, is not built immediately and occurs in 5 years or some number of years later. Conditions affecting the existing system could change. Certain minor details of the project plans, could change even in an earlier phase of construction. And so this is simply asking for updated calculations to reflect the final project and the existing conditions. And so if it were constructed tomorrow, should this project be approved, we would know that conditions are suitable. In the future, conditions could change, and we want those updated calculations to ensure adverse impacts to the stormwater system do not occur.
That makes sense. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Berman. Commissioner Big Stick.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, getting back to one of my original questions, how big are the catch basins?
Is that a question for the applicant or?
I believe that's a question for the applicant. Earlier, you referred me that direction.
Okay. There is a main catch basin that is placed at the eastern side of the curve of the driveway. That catch basin is a 36-inch catch basin intended to capture the runoff that comes from the adjacent properties and the upper sections of the hill. So that is the only catch basin that is receiving runoff from areas that are in natural state and what are considered that a semi-riparian area. All the other sections of the project, the downspouts from the building are connected directly to the flow-through planters. And on the driveway, there is two structures. One structure that is just a junction box, is not going to collect any water coming from the driveway. There is another one at the base of the driveway, which happens to be in that little island that separates the inwards driveway and the outlet driveway. That's a landscape section, that's a catch basin, and we left it intentionally as catch basin so that it could service that small landscape section. So that's a 24-inch catch basin as well.
So, and again, forgive me, I'm not an engineer. If you could kind of walk me through how much at any given moment those basins are able to capture. And I don't know how quickly they flow out of the basin also, so that might factor into the explanation. But how much water at any given moment in time does that hold, and how quickly does it flow back out into the stormwater system?
The current catch basin that is on site is a 24-inch catch basin, and we are increasing that to a 36-inch catch basin. Now, the catch basin per se is not acting as a detention structure. That is only functioning as an inlet to divert that surface draining into the 24-inch culvert that is running to the system. The water from our project, from the impervious areas of the project, that water is managed differently. That water is collected on the driveway through trenches that are diverting that through flow-through planters and then going through oversized pipes that have the capacity to hold that water so that it trickles outside. So there is a program that is called Bay Area Hydrology Model, and we have to comply with that model. So we have to model the site, show the flow through planters, the oversized pipes. We may have to use some other detention elements underground, but the key point is that outflow has to be consistent with the pre-development. So on the BAM, the Bay Area Hydrology Model, we have to model the site as it currently exists, and we have to model the site as it will be afterwards. And those results have to be consistent. So the system that we have right now, it shows the basic elements of the design, the conceptual of the design, and the preliminary calculations to show that the numbers are feasible and that they can be worked out. Once that we do the final design and the final calculations and the accurate design of each one of the elements, that's when the fine tuning comes to size correctly each one of the flow through planters, each one of the pipes, and actually when the water is coming out, So you have to create some small weirs so that the water trickles at a certain speed so that it doesn't overwhelm the city system.
Thank you very much. That was a very helpful explanation. One of the public comments that I heard was about the borings, and I read the initial 2002 Geotechnical about the borings that were taken. I, like the public, share a concern that one has not been taken further up into the property. If you can maybe give me an explanation why more borings haven't been taken, maybe even help me by playing a little devil's advocate, what we lose by not having borings a little deeper into the property. A little explanation in that area would be helpful, please.
Absolutely. The initial design that is done at the beginning of the project is a conceptual design. The soils report is at a feasibility level. It's a site buildable. What are the major problems that we can encounter? But that should not be construed as a design level soils report. When we move to the next phase of the project, there will be substantial additional geotechnical investigation work. There will be additional borings done. There will be seismic wave analysis to check the stability of the hillside. So there will be a whole array of testing that will have to be conducted so that the soils engineer can give us the proper criteria for designing the foundation and the retaining walls. Certain retaining walls may be appropriate to be supported with soil nails. Those are the ones that are located in areas that are very dense, very good rock. Some other retaining walls towards the front may have to be supported on drill piers. Some other retaining walls may have a spread footing. So those details are worked out on this next phase. On the design level, our soils engineers performs all this analysis, give us that criteria, and that goes to the peer reviewer from the city that checks the work that the soils engineer give us. And it's not until then that our final design is produced with the soils values and design criteria provided by our engineer, reviewed and blessed by the peer reviewers.
And does any grading occur before that moment in time?
Absolutely not.
Thank you. That is very helpful. Another question about the driveway, and my understanding was the specific placement of the ingress driveway had to do with making sure that it was safe, because people are presumably coming down the hill at a fairly rapid pace, and you want to make sure you have enough time to see them coming your way. And my understanding of what I read was the position of the driveway where it is, that's the safest place you can put that ingress driveway. Is that an accurate assessment?
Absolutely, yes, you got it right.
So would it be fair to say that placing that ingress anywhere else on the site would then lower the safety probabilities?
That is correct. That's why it was designed in that location. When we did our initial analysis, as I explained in my presentation, our goal was to have several driveways. And the traffic engineer told us absolutely not. You need to have as little as possible of driveways. So the first time we actually had a two-way driveway located in the same location. And that did not meet the criteria. It was okay for the traffic going in, but it was not okay for the traffic coming out. And that's how that little interesting design of the driveway being split and having that leg coming a little further down the hill, that's how it came about, to provide those additional 50 feet of visibility for a car coming down the street, so that a car coming onto the street has more visibility and more time to react for traffic leaving the site.
Thank you very much. Very helpful. I'm thinking of that person living at, I think it was 314A, right next door to the driveway. I'm just going to come back to it briefly. I don't think it calls for it's not a break it for me, but I do have a concern about sound, because that driveway is right next to that home. And like was mentioned by one of the commentators, well, you have to put a little bit more gas on to get up that hill seems likely. Is there any further noise mitigation that can be done in that area, or is everything that possibly could have been done to mitigate noise going up that driveway been done?
No, we can definitely improve the conditions. As I mentioned before, the driveway is somewhat depressed. So we have about 3-4 feet of retaining wall at the beginning. So we can construct kind of a sound wall, a fence on the side that doesn't exceed the 6-foot maximum height that the planning code requires, but it can be treated as a sound barrier. So we will be more than happy to incorporate that feature into the project.
Thank you very much. This is more a general comment, I think, than a question, although if it can be turned into a question, I urge you to meet me there. Because a lot of the community apparently is concerned with whether or not there's going to be a more erosion happening as a result of this development in their own areas. It sounds like you are doing everything in your power to catch every drop of water you can so that there will not be more erosion going to those other properties. If there's any more comment you want to make about that, I would welcome it.
Absolutely. I'd like to start by saying that I've been doing this since 1985, and I've been living in Pacifica since 1992. So as a resident of Pacifica, I've learned to love this town and protect this town, and I try to do that with each one of the projects that I worked on. One example would be creating a problem there. If I would not be 100% sure that this can be done, I'm not leaving town. I would be liable. I would be looked after. It's not good for me. This is my town. My kids live here. I want to make a beautiful project that is sound, that is safe, and that we can be proud of. So to put the sentimental part aside, technically, yes, we are doing everything that we can to comply with the regulations, to meet the requirements of the building code. And we have always been successful working out the final design elements with the staff and the plan checkers.
Thank you, Mr. Chavaria. I'm not the technical guy on commission, and so I'm doing everything I can to try to address community concerns to the best of my ability. And conversing with you in that vein to further my understanding and hopefully address at least one or two of the community's concerns is a pleasure. So thank you.
Thank you.
I have a couple very brief questions for staff, and really just following up on what I asked earlier. If Ms. O'Connor, you were able to come up with a number of on-street parking that is retained, or how much is lost, or both.
Yeah,
please.
and sorry. I wanted to correct some of the figures that I gave you earlier. So what the distance, the site distance evaluation recommends in terms of redlining the curb, it states that 150 feet western, or say north of the egress driveway is proposed for a red line, and 10 feet south or east, it's kind of difficult to tell, southeast of the egress driveway should be uphill, should be red line. So I first wanted to correct you with the numbers that I previously gave you. With those red lines, there's still about 9 parking spots along the frontage of the property, with the assumption that a parking spot is 20 feet deep. So 9 is your answer.
Thank you very much. And to Attorney Sharma, did you have a moment to look at those conditions of approval number 32 and 36 and be able to come up with if they could be incorporated into one, or if there's a legal reason why they need to be separate COAs?
Yeah. Yes, I had a chance to look at them, and I believe that one of them can be eliminated. I think I believe staff has a preference for eliminating condition of approval number 32 and keeping condition of approval 36.
Okay, so if and when a motion is made to approve with elimination of COA number 32.
Yes.
Thank you very much. That's all the questions I have at the moment, and I think I'll hold my tongue to allow others to deliberate or ask.
Thank you, Commissioner Bigstick. You know, I don't see any other hands at this point, so I guess we're probably at the point where, you know, folks may want to begin to deliberate, state kind of where they are, and or you know, offer a motion if people feel like they're at that stage. So, Commissioner Hauser.
Thank you, Chair. I'm having a hard time with this one. I can appreciate that it's very difficult to do infill development on a site that has a lot of topography. I can also appreciate that the applicant has really done a good job of trying to make sure that they're hitting all of the, you know, density requirements, height requirements, parking requirements, or exceed them. And so I do appreciate those things. I think the thing that's really hard for me is that, you know, you look at the design guidelines and retaining walls are discouraged. And I understand that, you know, obviously a site that has this much grade needs retaining, but I think that the monumentality that comes from a project that's built 20 feet above the street level, plus an additional 30, I mean, the number that Mr. Chavaria gave me was 57 feet above grade level from the public street. And if you look at the rest of the street going up the hill, it's the only property that would have retaining walls in the front. There's a little pocket park that's city owned that has a very small, like 3 or 4 foot retaining wall. And then everything else has the benefit of being on the downhill side. So I think, you know, I understand that there are setbacks. I understand that there's natural topography. I think between that and the fact that some of the things that I think are really important on a site like this, where, you know, it's infill development, you want to talk to the community and understand the concerns. Like having a landscape architect look at where trees should go is something that's very typical on an entitlement application. And so I don't think personally that I feel comfortable approving or rejecting or recommending approval or rejection of this project. I would personally feel most comfortable with continuing this and allowing the applicant to study potentially ways to improve the massing conditions, some of the livability conditions that other commissioners have brought up, like garbage cans going up and down stairs, you know, the parallel parking issues that Commissioner Berman brought up. Some of, you know, Commissioner Bigstick had a lot of good points. And then, you know, a lot of the tree concerns, this is a removal of 60 some odd trees. So, you know, mitigating for just the 7 heritage trees to me is not, it's not enough. So that's where I stand.
Thank you, Commissioner Hauser. Commissioner Berman.
I agree with Commissioner Hauser. I really want this project to move forward, and I love that it gives Pacifica an affordable housing unit because we need more BMR units. And I think that the general aesthetics of the development and the structure is pretty, it's nice. To add to some of Commissioner Hauser's concerns though, there's a few concerns that I have that it sounds like could be very much incorporated into the site plan. But there's just quite a few where I'd rather a revise and resubmit rather than a furnish as corrected. And just to list out some of the items, I'd like to, I would appreciate if the applicant could review a little more space, giving a turnaround, or somehow making it easier for guests parallel parked on the access drive to turn around safely. A high level garbage management plan, just a thoughtful outlook on how residents will bring their trash bins I mean, it might be 3 bins. It might be garbage, recycle, and compost, bringing that to an appropriate location that doesn't impair the sight triangles of the driveway and also is aesthetically pleasing for the neighbors in the neighborhood. Another item that I feel pretty passionately about, and I think would be a major benefit to the community here, is replacement of the entire sidewalk frontage. So sidewalk, curb, gutter, and then just from my look at it, I'm guessing a good amount of the asphalt directly adjacent to the curb will need to be replaced too. But I know there's guidelines during the building permit process and inspection process that will confirm that. But I think it would be a nice benefit to the community here if there were an entire new sidewalk along this frontage. And it looks like a good amount of it's going to have to be replaced anyways. So I'm hoping that that's not too much of a burden on the applicant. Also, I forgot to mention this earlier, there were a few comments on the maintenance of the hillside. I do know that we have a condition of approval that the property owner needs to maintain the storm drainage throughout the property. But I'm wondering if, I don't know if we need to revise the conditions of approval or what, but making sure the applicant needs to maintain the vegetation throughout the property, including the hillside where they're not developing. I'm sure there's already guidelines for that somewhere that I'm probably missing. And then lastly, I liked Commissioner Big Stick's wanting insurance that the sound barrier aspects of the wall along the southern property line get incorporated to the retaining wall, which it sounded peaceful. So I would appreciate a continuance for this project. And like I said, I really want this to go through. I think it's going to be a great addition of housing for Pacifica.
Commissioner Big Stick.
Thank you, Chair. And, you know, when I came on commission and to this very day, I have a strong leaning toward wanting to add to the housing stock from a standpoint of wanting people to be able to live here, specifically from our community, which is why even one affordable unit or something broaching affordability is a very exciting proposition for me. And I really like the idea of adding that at housing, or also from the perspective of just the city has numbers that it needs to make. So either way I look at it, I really like the idea of adding housing. And that being said, there's a lot of really good public feedback about why it is we would want to see a plan that's a little bit more fleshed out. There's community concern that that I think the better you address it. So, you know, one of the commentators made a comment that if we pass this tonight, it'll be appealed to council. And while that is absolutely not a consideration for this commission, I think that we're going to base anything on. My experience in our community is that if a commentator makes such a comment, sure enough, later we'll be called to liaison. And for one, you know, continuing this affords the applicant the opportunity to address a lot of those concerns and come across as a good neighbor in addressing those concerns and addressing those concerns in such a way that this winds up being a project that we can look at closer to at a glance and say, yes, clearly there's no problem with this, and clearly the community concerns are unfounded. And there's so much discussion and so much nuance lost in this initial proposal that it seems like, since already the applicant is on the path of fleshing this out, you know, just as of yesterday or a week ago, a condition of approval was satisfied. And it seems like everything is so close to being where it should be that it would be a treat for this commission to see that product a little bit closer to a place where then, if the community still has that concern, that they would bring it to council We all know upon passing it that it's going to fly through there without as much consternation as it might if we don't take the time to get it just a little bit closer to that point. So while I absolutely favor adding housing stock, I am happy to lean into consensus with my fellow commissioners and see this made something that we can all easily agree to instead of something where we have as much trepidation going into it as apparently so far we have. Thank you.
Commissioner Godwin.
Yeah, I guess my view of this is it's a challenging piece of property to develop, and certainly the applicant has offered a number of innovative features that I appreciate: the roof decks, the all-electric design, really some strong consideration on the drainage plan. I think there are some minor improvements that could be made, and while I would be comfortable with approving it tonight personally, and counting on the applicant to make the improvements in the preliminary design and the detailed design, I'm okay with continuing it as well.
Commissioner Leal.
Yeah, I just want to add that I share the sentiment as my fellow commissioners. In general, I'm in favor of this project. Adding more housing, adding an additional affordable housing unit is great for our city, and I'm comfortable with continuing it as well.
Thanks, everybody. I think I would count myself as in Commissioner Godwin's camp. I am frankly comfortable with this project. I think it's well conceived. I think the staff report rather exhaustively dealt with the various issues. I think some concerns, very frankly appropriate concerns, were raised this evening, and certainly Commissioner Berman and Commissioner Hauser, Commissioner Big Stick. Well, everybody's gone through some things that I think could put a finer point on the project. I don't know that finer point necessarily requires a continuance. In my view, it was we spent an awful lot of time this evening going through rather carefully the matters that were raised. I'd frankly be in favor of approving the project this evening, subject to some of the fine tuning again that was discussed here. On the other hand, I can certainly see where folks are going here. If we were going to continue it, I would want to be pretty clear about why we were continuing it and what specifically we would be expecting the applicant to be bringing back to us, so that we don't spend a lot of time covering a lot of the same ground we covered this evening. So folks who are thinking a continuance makes sense, it'd be good to hear exactly what it is that we hope to see, and frankly, hopefully we can set this for a time certain that is not in the distant future, so that we can take action on this and move it along. Commissioner Godwin.
I think I've completed my comments. Thank you.
I'm sorry. That was, your hand was from prior. Commissioner Berman.
Thanks, Chair Newblin. I previously listed a few items that I'd like to see, but I'm wondering if maybe jointly with Commissioner Hauser and Commissioner Big Stick, if we could come up with a list, and then I would be ready to make a motion for continuance. If anyone would like to second. So I'll go ahead and start a list. I'll just quickly mention what I mentioned before. Consideration of a vehicle turnaround at the terminus of the private road, mainly for the guest parking stalls that are going to be parallel parked. A high-level garbage management plan that considers the safety of where the bins are located, and just the convenience of residents being able to roll out the bins, as well as aesthetics too. I would like to see the replacement of the entirety of the sidewalk, curb, and gutter along the property frontage. Just confirmation that the property owner will maintain the hillside throughout the property, not just in the development area. And then incorporation of sound barrier protection within the retaining wall, especially adjacent to the resident to the south. And then Commissioner Hauser, I'll pass it to you.
Thank you, Commissioner Berman. Before that, I just wanted to kick something over to the city attorney really quickly. Pertains to the replacement of the sidewalk, curb and gutter, et cetera. And, you know, sort of the nexus, sort of the Nolan Dolan aspects of that, and whether or not there's any concern that we should have around that particular condition, which I'm fine with, assuming there's a nexus to require it.
That's a great question. From the materials I reviewed and the discussion that I've heard, I'm not sure that I'm comfortable with the nexus issue currently. I'm happy to look at that, but if this is continued, but based on what I've heard at this point, unless there was some evidence of the property or the itself having caused some of the issues that have been raised, I'm not so sure that those findings can be made at this point, but I'm happy to take a closer look at that going forward.
Well, my sense is that thank you. My sense is if the matter's continued, we'll probably want a little time spent on digging into that. We don't want to require something that isn't legal to require, but
yeah, perhaps if a section could be added to the staff report, if it is continued.
Commissioner,
but then just a question then, given that this is a fairly large development for Pacifica, at what point is a project required to replace the sidewalk in front of it? Because I know also, especially in Pedro Point, there's single family home developments that are building new sidewalks that don't even lead anywhere. So just for my future understanding, when is the sidewalk appropriate for an applicant to build and when is it not?
Commissioner Berman, I wanted to weigh in on this particular sidewalk question. I think I share Chair Niblin's interest in how we relate the sidewalk to the project. Certainly, we have a complete streets policy at the city to ensure that not just vehicular transportation, but all modes of transportation, including pedestrian means of transportation, are included in projects. Where there are existing sidewalks, it's generally the case that pedestrian component is satisfied. However, if the sidewalk was degraded to the point that it could not accomplish that function safely, that may be a basis to require replacement of those damaged or degraded sections to the extent that they were restored to perform that necessary function. So I have not specifically evaluated the sidewalk, and the planning team will engage with our engineering colleagues to evaluate that in some greater detail. I think more generally, the obligation is for a property owner to replace the sidewalk when it creates a safety hazard. And so that is an obligation that exists under state law, under the Streets and Highways Code. However, I'm not, again, aware of the condition of the sidewalks in this particular location where they exist presently. On the second component that you touched on as far as public improvements, could you elaborate more on the relationship to the curb and gutter that you're seeking to be replaced?
My assumption is that if the sidewalk were going to be replaced and if the AC were going to be grind and overlaid or replaced, that best management practice would be to replace the curb and gutter as well. But the main item that I'm concerned with is the sidewalk, I suppose. And
so
just
to the extent that the curb and gutter would be an incidental component of the sidewalk replacement, you were describing it generally, but not specifically saying that there's a project impact that you've identified with respect to the curb and gutter.
Other than, I mean, it appears there's several locations where even the curb and gutter is a little deteriorated. I guess I don't have an issue with the city standard curb and gutter that is intended to be there in the existing condition. Does that answer the question?
I think so. So I think what we need to do as staff is to take a closer look first at the condition of the sidewalk and its ability to perform the required function for the Complete Streets program, or an obligation to replace some or all of the sidewalk under the Streets and Highways Code because it presents a safety problem. I think secondarily, we need to look at where the stormwater from the site will discharge. If it's into the curb and gutter, we need to determine, can it perform that minimum function to safely convey the stormwater from the project? If this project does not have meaningful contributions to that curb and gutter because it's piping underground, then we'll need to just outline and describe that dimension so the commission can weigh the nexus to the project and its obligation to perform certain minimum health and safety functions.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I have no doubt that it'll be found that the curb and gutter can sufficiently convey drainage. I guess my main concern is the sidewalk. And honestly, just giving the community and the neighborhood a good finished product, and so much is going into a beautiful structure, 8 beautiful structures and landscaping, and then to have an old deteriorated sidewalk, or even a new sidewalk and then an old gutter that's even a different concrete color than the new one, it just wouldn't be ideal and aesthetically as pleasing. But my main concern is the sidewalk.
Thank you, Commissioner Berman. Commissioner Hauser.
So I have a couple things kind of floating around in my mind. So first of all, out of deference to the applicant, if we do proceed with a continuance, it would be my preference to continue to a date certain that the applicant and staff are comfortable with, so that this is not kind of floating out there for months and months and months. I think one of our other commissioners had already said that. I do want to kind of touch back on the sidewalk. I know that staff is going to look at this, but I would say that on a project that has this much frontage with so many new utility connections, first of all, if you look at the sidewalk, there's a lot to go on. But with this many new utility connections, I would find it very odd that there not be a nexus to update the sidewalk and the half of the street through which those connections were going. I don't think I've ever done a project where that wasn't a requirement across the Bay Area. So I would like to see that on the list as long as there's not a legal issue with that. I would add that my 2 particular items are looking at the trees and making a recommendation as to where those additional trees would go and what that mitigation ratio would be. I think when this comes back, having that information would be extremely helpful. And I think that also, for me, making sure that we have either reduced the massing as much as possible so that it's a more palatable and complementary aesthetic, or finding design solutions that bolster the existing plan, like again, perhaps adding street trees or doing something where you're not walking along the sidewalk and looking up at 50 feet of buildings. So those are my 2 things for the list.
Thank you, Commissioner Hauser. Commissioner Big Stick.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure if, what occurs to me is somebody made a comment about 50 trees. It seems like it would be right that it would be offset by some number of replacement trees. And, we're an environmentally friendly community. It seems like it might tie into greenhouse emission and is that carbon, when you hold on to the carbon in the trees and then you cut them down and the carbon goes. Pardon me, it's late and my brain's a little fried. But I'm wondering if that factors into the equation at all. And I think Commissioner Hauser set down about the trees as much as need be, but I'm wondering if that other component factors in. That aside, drainage was my chief concern. And as I said earlier, while my conversation with Mr. Shavaria helped me to understand better and addressed my chief concerns, as per condition of approval 29, for instance, in which those calculations were relatively recently put through, yet not quite for us to ingest. It would be helpful to have calculations like that are included in when it comes back to us, because I want to be able to look at the neighborhood, all of whom apparently are deeply concerned about drainage issues and erosion, and watching those waterfalls that are going down their various streets further accentuated by this project, and say, as near as I can tell from everything I've read, from every calculation they've put on paper, I can in good conscience tell you, I do not think this will contribute to your issue. And that would be very nice if that is something I can say once this is brought back to us and we have voted. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Big Stick. I'm going to ask staff and maybe even the applicant, I'm going to take the liberty of doing that, whether or not there's a sense that you have whether or not you have a sense of where the commission is, those members of the commission who've expressed these concerns as to what's wanted or expected next time we convene to consider this matter.
Thank you, Chair. I would say that I have a clear sense of what the commission would like staff to evaluate and to work with the applicant to gather more information about. With respect to dates for potential continuance, the soonest opportunity I would feel comfortable scheduling this to come back is September 8th. That does require that the applicant work quickly, and so I'd like to hear a commitment from the applicant team that they could get something back to the city staff within 2 to 3 weeks, so that we have a week or two to evaluate it before we have to publish the report. If that's too hurried, the next opportunity would be September 21st. And that would give me more comfort if we could agree to that date with the applicant, but I would offer as well September 8th as an alternative.
Well, I'd certainly want whatever date we arrive on to be a date that we can be pretty confident we're going to be able to reconvene on. So, I guess hear from the applicant then as to whether or not they think which of those two dates they think is feasible.
Javier, when I hear what the commissioners are talking about, all of these things, I think we can resolve very quickly. So I would expect that if there is a continuance, that a hearing on September 8th would be easily achievable by us. But before we get to that, the comments that I've heard, I think, are good practical comments, and I want to be clear on what my thinking is with respect to them. On the street tree idea, I think it's an excellent idea, and I support it. But I want it to be done in consultation with an arborist and landscape architect, so that the trees are placed where they're going to thrive, and the trees that are selected are appropriate for the microclimate where the property exists. With respect to the turnaround needed for the guest parking, I think Javier has already been thinking about that and has identified a location where some sort of hammerhead could be created to address that concern. With respect to the replacement of the sidewalk in front, I look at it in two ways. One way is from a public safety point of view, but I also look at it from an aesthetic perspective. If we're going to create a great project, it has to look great all the way. And it would compromise the aesthetic of the project if we had discolored or broken sidewalks along the front of it. So I have no problems at all replacing the sidewalk. We're going to be doing 2 curb cuts anyway. I haven't looked closely at the condition of the sidewalk. I mean, when I've been out there, it couldn't be too bad because otherwise it would have jumped out at me. But in terms of the overall aesthetic outcome, a clean, newly poured sidewalk, I think, benefits the project overall. So I don't have a problem with that one either. Regarding the sound barrier, I really have 2 concerns. One is that putting a sound barrier is certainly easily done, but I think we should ask the neighbor who we're trying to protect whether this is a concern for them. There's only one house there, and nobody's ever knocked on the door and asked them if they have a concern about noise generated from cars that are driving in a driveway. The second thing is that we're also doing this based upon our own anecdotal experience, I guess, because none of the scientific studies that have been done have raised that concern. I'm not saying that we don't put the sound barrier in, but I think at a minimum, we should ask the neighbor whether it's something that they would like to see there. And we ought to take a look at what the sound barrier is going to look like. We don't want a sound barrier that's going to be visually offensive. So I guess what I'm saying is that in principle, I'm not opposed to it, but I want to make sure that we have a good reason for doing it, that's all. So where I'm going with this is that there are two ways to address this. One is to do the continuance, and then we work with staff and we come back. The other way is to simply agree to these points in principle, subject to our working with staff to come up with satisfactory solutions that satisfy staff that the technical solutions we've created are reasonable and acceptable.
Thank you, Mr. Kondrabecki. Commissioner Hauser, I saw your hand was up.
Yeah, I don't want to, the noise comment wasn't mine, so I don't want to, steamroll anybody. But if a noise study was conducted, which I believe we discussed it was, I typically those studies are typically fairly conservatively done, and so if the study did not have additional requirements beyond, I think there was a condition of approval that a temporary sound barrier be built during construction, I personally would not feel the need to go above the requirements of that study. I do appreciate the idea of conditioning all of the comments, but I think especially, the massing comment that I have, it could potentially be a big comment, but I think you can resolve it with landscaping. My concern is that you only have a couple of feet between terraces, and we need to understand irrigation and root barriers, all that fun stuff. So I would feel more comfortable if that was addressed on a landscape plan, potentially incorporated into a rendering or an elevation, whatever is easier and faster for you, and then brought back for review. My intention with that comment is not for you to regrade the entire site and come back with a 20-foot building. So let me just be clear on that. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Big Stick.
Thank you. And since I was the one who recommended noise attenuation, if possible, I probably would not have brought it up a second time if not for one of the public commenters calling me by name and making the point that the extra gas needed to get up the hill is a thing. So it's not, as I said earlier, necessarily a make it or break it for me, but I think that if we are continuing, absolutely, that gives the opportunity to talk to the neighbor, which I think is a splendid idea, and then make sure that that noise wall, I guess, is not an eyesore, and then we can have that knowledgeable discussion at the next meeting. Much more than that, pardon the pun that's quasi-intended, deluge of feedback about drainage concern. I think that especially, and forgive me, in our town, it is not uncommon that a planning commission ruling goes to council for appeal. I wouldn't recommend it. I think that, if and when we pass this, because I think that we're very close to passing it, we will all be confident in that. But it's not an uncommon occurrence. And when that happens, if that drainage plan is fully fleshed out to the point where, this can, I'm pointing to the example because it just jumped out at me of COA number 29. If that's there fleshed out and we're able to point to that directly and say, aha, if and when it gets to council, because again, it's not so unlikely, it'll make it frankly easier on your end to then be able to say, well, we present it to the commission as fully as humanly possible. And here it is. And now it's here for your perusal, more fleshed out than it was when we first presented to commission. And it should make life easier for you on the back end, I would think. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Big Stick. So that is all the hands I see right now. So I guess we're at the point where we would entertain a motion if somebody is going to make a motion. Commissioner Berman.
I move that we request a continuance of this item to a date certain. Staff, is there a date? Do we decide on a date?
I think we decided on September 8th, if I'm not,
8th.
as a date that appears to be feasible.
Okay, I move that we continue this item to the date of September 8th, 2020, and that the applicant consider items recommended by the commission for review.
So we have a motion. Is there a second to that motion? Commissioner Hauser.
Second the motion.
Okay, so we have a motion to continue this item to September 8th, date certain, and directing the applicant, I guess, to work in conjunction with staff to address the various matters that were raised by the Planning Commission in its deliberations here.
Okay.
So motion and a second. Well, if we could have a roll call vote, please.
Commissioner Berman.
Yes.
Commissioner Big Stick.
Yes.
Commissioner Godwin.
Yes.
Commissioner Hauser.
Yes.
Commissioner Leal.
Yes.
Commissioner Niblin.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. All right, so we'll see this matter again next month. That then will take us to commission communications. Are there any commission communications? Commissioner Big Stick.
Thank you, Chair. It's becoming a ritual at this point, but as the county is starting to once again draw back on various uses that are allowed to continue in the business sector, just a friendly reminder, we need to do everything we can to keep each other safe, and mostly that means masks and distance and washing one's hands. And just keep at it. It's not a sprint, it's a marathon. And I am blessed to live in a community in which the vast majority of us are running that race side by side, and together we'll get through this. So thank you.
And thank you. Commissioner Godwin.
Yeah, I just wanted to commend the staff on this project. I thought the review of this effort was both thorough and professional, and I appreciate it.
Thank you. I'll echo that. Commissioner Berman.
I want to echo that as well, and I want to thank the applicant and civil engineer for the project. I know it's difficult to have a project, let alone a housing project, on a site with a lot of grade, and I think you're doing a great job, and I'm looking forward to seeing this project again next month. On that same note, I also want to mention that I attended via Zoom the Board of Supervisors meeting for the Cypress Point project. It's an affordable housing project for 71 units in Lost Beach. And just so everyone knows, I'm happy to report that the changes to the local coastal program requested by the applicant were approved unanimously.
Yeah, congratulations on getting to that step. That's real good progress. I guess that's what we have for commission communications. We'll turn then to staff communication.
Thank you, Chair. I have two announcements. The first is related to our Plan Pacifica effort, which you'll recall is the general plan update, local coastal program update, and the Sharp Park specific plan. We are hosting a online only community meeting for the Sharp Park specific plan on August 13th. The meeting will start at 6 p.m. It's intended as an informational opportunity for the community to learn about the Sharp Park specific plan so that they're fully informed and can participate and interact intelligently from an informed position moving forward to the City Council later later in September rather. And so you can register and find more information on planpacifica.org. We've got the links to the Eventbrite page and other information about the session. Starts at 6 p.m. and all are invited. The meeting will also serve as the scoping meeting for the environmental impact report, which we're preparing for the Sharp Park specific plan and the general plan update. So it's an important meeting, and we hope that we can spread the word widely and get a lot of folks to participate. August 13th is a big date, not only for the Sharp Park specific plan, but it will be the last day with the City of Pacifica for Assistant City Manager Lorenzo Hines. He is going to be the new city manager of the City of Galt. And so that's a great opportunity for him. We certainly wish him the best, and hopefully you'll have an opportunity to send a nice message to him before he takes off on August 13th with his last day. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Murdoch, for those announcements. And that takes us then to the portion of the agenda where I call for a motion to adjourn. Is there a motion to adjourn? Commissioner Big Stick.
I will move we adjourn.
Is there a second to that motion? Commissioner Godwin.
I second that motion.
Great. Well, we've got a motion to second. I'll ask for a roll call vote, please.
Commissioner Berman.
Yes.
Commissioner Big Stick.
Yes.
Commissioner Godwin.
Yes.
Commissioner Hauser.
I think that was yes.
That was yes.
Commissioner Leal.
Yes.
Commissioner Niblin.
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. We're adjourned. Everybody have a nice rest of the evening.
Thank you, commissioners, for all your time, efforts, and good work for our project. We'll do our best.